Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 215. That's PEP or Planet Extra podcast. I am Chaz the Chaddo, a host of Planet America on ABC Australia. And this is, in fact, the official podcast.
That's right.
Of the ABC. It's the only one. There are no other podcasts
None of
on
the others
ABC.
are official podcasts
We've
of the
gone
ABC.
all the way to owning the ABC. It is our pearl. We cover all the stuff on PEP. That's too nerdy for TV. If you're listening, you can find us on YouTube at the PEP with Chaz and Dr. Dave channel. And you can also see highlights on the PEP Clips YouTube channel. You also find timestamps and show notes in our blurbs. And if you leave a comment under our current episode video, we are likely to see it. You can also tweet us or blue sky us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at PepChaz Dr. Dave. If you want to chat to some fellow Peppers, you can join our Discord server. It's on the screen now or in the blurb of the podcast. If you want to contact me or Lockie the Lucky, though, privately, why not email us? The address is producer@pepthepodcast.com. The address again is producer@pepthepodcast.com. I need to reply to them again. It's been a while. But now let's turn to the man who will never raise the stakes on inconsequential views.
Absolutely not.
Talking about Dr. Pepper himself, Dr. David Smith.
Rang woman chong bang huoli. That is Chinese for let's get peppy, or more accurately, let us be full of energy. I'm Associate Professor David Smith, and I work at the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. But I do not speak for either of those institutions, and especially because I'm going to be talking a little bit about American higher education today. Let me make it very clear. I am only talking on my own behalf, not on the behalf of any institution.
And let me make it very clear as well that I am explicitly and exclusively speaking for the managing director of the ABC. So, and this is the official podcast.
That's right.
Of the ABC. Oh, dear. What are you grateful for, Dave?
I'm going to do one of my periodic gratefuls for various peppers that I run into in various contexts. So as well as the peppers who were in my class this semester, it was great having you guys there. There was a group of peppers that I ran into on Glebe Point Road a couple of weeks ago. I was just walking down one night and suddenly I hear this, Dave, behind me.
A gang of peppers.
A gang of peppers. And it was wonderful to meet them.
Oh, wonderful. Were they cool kids?
Of course they were.
Was that like...
I've never seen anything cooler than these kids. But yeah, it was really great to meet them, and I'm very happy. One of them was about to take a long flight the next day. This was a Friday night. And so he was really hoping that we would have a PEP available for him by the time he got on that plane, and I'm very proud to say that we did.
I'm chuffed as well.
Yes.
Fantastic news. I'll tell you what I'm grateful for. I often get asked for blogs.
Yes.
From peppers who are writing in, asking questions, and please do. I know we haven't done correspondence for a little while we're bidding in this pod, and we're not going to do, I'm going to do one correspondence today, but not much. That is coming soon. The correspondence is coming soon, so do keep on writing.
So when you say you asked for blogs, what do you mean?
What I mean by that, well, let me just finish the
Okay,
blag first.
Yeah.
And that is, people do please send in either questions or critiques. I especially love critiques. You'll notice I put them right at the top, the critiques. I love them. But yes, people know I do a lot of reading.
Yes.
And they know that I don't read newspapers per se. I read a lot of newspaper articles. But my standard unit of reading is a blog.
Yes.
Which is an old school journal entry from the...
I was going to say,
2000s.
so do you get asked about that by readers who are doing high school projects on the history of ancient technologies?
Not so much that.
Okay.
People are just curious what I read. So can you give me some examples of things to read?
Yeah.
And my reading list, it's like 150 different blogs. Okay, there is no way that you can go through that.
Managed via spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I've got a reader. which I and then I put the highlights in the spreadsheet.
Yes. Yeah.
But my point is that it is about 14 hours of reading a day. You're not going to do that, and I don't like to give too many out because the reason why is because you'll hold me responsible for what they say.
Yeah.
And usually...
You're like, I can't believe that you directed me to a blog of Tyler Cowen talking about how AI is better than actual literature.
And I do read Tyler Cowen. But you got to realize a lot of what I read is intentionally biased. As in, I pick intentionally biased stuff because I want different perspectives and different angles.
Yes.
And then but if you're only going to read one thing, I don't want you to read the most biased thing you can find. That's not good. So I don't like making recommendations for that reason. But every now and then there's a couple of blogs where I think, this is good for general purpose readers.
Okay, so you're going to recommend something.
I'm going to recommend one. I used to recommend, my go-to recommendation used to be Kevin Drum, but he's now dead, so I'm not going to do that anymore. You'll read very little from Kevin
he's
Drum.
Never going to drop off in quality.
Well, that is true. But it's a bit few and far between the blogs from Kevin Drum these days. So what I'm going to recommend, the next one is Outside the Beltway. And I'll put a link in my homework.
That's still around.
That is still around, yes. They've got a few writers outside the Beltway. One of them works in the Defence Department. One of them is a teacher. There's a few of them.
Working in the Defence Department is not particularly outside the Beltway, I would have thought.
No. Look, you could get them for false advertising. But I assume that most people who read them aren't reading them because they hate the Beltway, but more because they just like what they say.
Okay.
Essentially, these guys are ex-Republicans, kind of centre-right never-Trumpers, essentially. They're particularly good for doing sweeps of stories. They don't do a lot, but if there's like a big story, they'll do a sweep of maybe excerpts from 4 or 5 newspapers with extra comments, and they're pretty good coverage of that particular story. The reason I am bringing them up now is because there was one piece which I thought was particularly good, which I'm going to direct you guys to as an introduction to Outside the Beltway. It was a piece on Trump's lies, and it's almost categorical in that it goes through every single kind of lying there is. And there's a lot of different kinds of lying. I didn't realize how many different kinds of lying there were, with examples of each different kind of lie. And then after demonstrating that, and they go, politicians do a lot of lying. And here are examples. What makes Trump's lying different to other politicians? Because there are some very prolific liars out there that aren't Trump.
That's true.
And Trump's lies are different. They go through exactly how they are different. All the different ways as well that Trump doubles down when he's caught lying, which is also very different to other politicians. And then all the ramifications for American politics. I was looking at that and I was thinking I could spend 20 minutes summarising this on PEP. But rather, I'll just give you guys the piece. You can just read it for yourselves. And so that's a good introduction to Outside the Beltway. That's a good piece.
This is the second week in a row where You're Grateful has been for some sort of compendium of Trump shit.
Well,
so that we don't have to explain it.
Yeah, you're right. And it's because this is the second week in a row we've had a 3-hour limit. So I particularly appreciate not having to waste half an hour on someone's article.
Fair enough.
So you can go read that article for yourself and see what you think. And if you like Outside the Beltway, you can keep on reading. But I'm not saying you have to, but just, that's my new go-to recommendation, I would say. It's a bit of a tour de force on the topic of lies, if you're into that. Now, I did say there'll be one correspondence. I'll just do it very, very quickly. That is, it's not a correction, which is normally the ones I put at the top, but just so many people asked about my visa interview after the Bin Laden thing, which I mentioned last week. I said that, I had a pretty horrific experience trying to go to America after I dressed as Osama Bin Laden crashed the APEC summit in 2007. I went to America in 2009, actually to film for the third series of The War and Everything. And the difference in the visa interview in 2006 when I went for my honeymoon and 2009 when I went for The War and Everything after I had done the Bin Laden thing was extraordinary. I don't know what happens now. I haven't been to America since 2009. But what used to be the case was their embassy was in this skyscraper.
Yeah, MLC Centre.
Yeah, you go right up to the top of that skyscraper and there's almost like a bank window you go up to, and they just ask like 4 or 5 questions, and then there's your stamp, and then you're out of here. That was the case in 2006. 2009, it started like that, and then they ushered me into a little room, a little room without windows, and I stayed in that room for 3 hours. Now, to be clear, they weren't threatening; they were friendly. They were very friendly, and especially when they realized that I was on TV and I showed them some YouTube clips, they got really friendly then. But the friendliness didn't stop the interviewing. And it just went on and on.
Were they
and
reading
on.
out the name of every victim of 9/11?
But no, that wasn't
So
like
what would
that.
you say to him?
It wasn't
what would you
like
say
that.
to him?
It was more taking clips from the TV show and asking me to justify them in some way. Not from an outrage point of view, but just, okay, so what do you...
The one of you in the bee suit?
What do you... No, I could never explain that one. Just go, okay, so what are you trying to do there? What are you trying... I think they were trying to ascertain what my ideology was.
Right.
And it's just... And then...
You said my ideology is comedy.
Well, I didn't do that. Then they asked me about the practicals of like how I did APEC, how I did that, how I did that.
Yeah.
It just went on and on and on. It was very friendly. I want to emphasize that. It was not threatening at all, but just went forever. And then they got me back again, just for a few details. And that was another 2.5 hours. So I went from basically a 4-question interview in 2006 to a 5.5 hour series of ordeals in 2009. And it's not the most exciting story, but just you want to know what happened? That's what happened. And so, just so you all know. And I do have some great stories, some much better stories than that, from that trip in 2009 when I was, again, dressed as bin Laden in front of the White House. I will share that with you another time. But that's a really good story. But this will do just to answer your questions. Okay. Now, got a couple of updates, Dave, before we get into the main content. First of all, Trump corruption update. The Qatar plane in particular. Apparently, even now, the legal teams representing America and Qatar have not finalised an agreement.
Yeah, we keep hearing
this bloody plane.
Yes.
And the reason for that is interesting. Qatar want Washington to create a memorandum of understanding. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't heard about this.
They want a memorandum of understanding stipulating that the aircraft's transfer, one, was initiated by the Trump administration, not by them. And so we did say that a couple of weeks ago that was the case. And two...
So say, we were responding to your request for a bribe. We are not offering you a bribe.
But this is the important one. Two, Qatar is not responsible for any future transfers of the plane's ownership beyond the Defense Department.
Oh!
For exactly the reasons you just said, Dave.
Yes.
They want it to be clear that Qatar is not responsible if Trump ends up with the plane because they're worried about future administration, a future Democratic administration, holding them accountable for a bribe. And I think it's very wise for them to be concerned about that. So that is a standoff at the moment. Also, the price tag keeps going up for this supposed freebie. I don't know if you saw the last price tag. According to Air Force officials who reviewed the aircraft, it was very poorly maintained, apparently. And it would require a huge renovation just to make it suitable for anyone, let alone Air Force One. Even before you put on like the lasers and the alligators and all that kind of stuff, just having a plane that someone sits on is going to require work. And the estimate now is $1.5 billion to meet Air Force One requirements. And then to remove the military gear and convert it for civilian use afterwards is another $500 million. So you're talking $2 billion now for this freebie plane, which kind of sucks. It goes to what I was saying a few weeks back about what this really is the taxpayer subsidizing Trump's cool plane.
Yes.
Rather than a Qatari bribe per se. I mean, it is a Qatari bribe as well.
Yes, yeah.
But it's actually a taxpayer who's paying most of this money here.
Yeah. Look, I'm not surprised that this thing looks very impressive to Trump, yet is incredibly poorly maintained at the same time.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like his real estate empire.
Yeah, although this isn't dripping in gold. Or maybe it is. Maybe that's why it cost $2 billion. I should add as well, though, one of the officials noted it might cost less than that if Trump waives some of the security requirements. Former Air Force Security Frank Kendall made, I think, a very good point.
Yeah.
If the president said, I want this in a year and a half, and I don't care what capabilities it has, as long as it's a luxury flying palace with my colours on it, then it can be done. He'll have to waive some security requirements, which he can do. He's the commander-in-chief. Nobody's going to make him have those features. He's right. That's correct. So it'll either cost taxpayers $2 billion or it'll be a second-rate Air Force One. They're your options.
It's correct, but it's so wrong.
Yes, yeah.
Although, I mean, this is a point where if he just says, I'm going to waive these security requirements, sure, most of the people who want him dead aren't going to complain about that.
That is true. That is true.
There's going to be a rare point of convergence between the Trump superfans and the people who absolutely want him dead.
Uniting the world.
Yeah.
It's kind of. I got another update here for you, Dave.
Yes.
This is an update on my nightmare, which I'm going to continue to promote on this podcast because I'm so confident that it's going to happen.
This is the complete undermining of the parliamentarian.
No, this is the one where they undermine economic statistics.
Oh.
My nightmare.
I was going to say, is it the one where they completely undermine the parliamentarian? The one where, what was the judicial guardrails one that was being threatened last week?
The semi-judicial guardrails.
Oh, the Humphrey's executor.
Yeah.
Where, is it the Humphrey's executor nightmare?
Yeah.
No, it's a statistics nightmare.
The statistics nightmare. The thing which this is my true nightmare. I know I've got many, but my true nightmare is in 3 years' time we can't trust the unemployment statistics.
Oh, right.
That is my true nightmare because I rely so much on statistics, Dave. Not just me, a lot of people do.
Oh, well,
but yeah, and that's the one thing we can always trust.
Government as a modern institution relies on statistics.
Absolutely. And this is the one thing which everyone who isn't a conspiracy theorist trusts.
Yeah.
And I'm living in fear that will last another maybe 18 months. And then they're going to start fooling with the economic statistics. I'm really worried about that. And I've got an update on that right now.
Yeah, what's that?
Which is on Monday, the administration published the outlook for US agricultural trade, May 2025. One of my favourite publications, Dave. It's put up by the Agriculture Department on a quarterly basis. Not a big deal in itself. You wouldn't say it's hot off the presses. Not usually overly controversial, but there was something missing from this quarter's agricultural trade update. And that is a forecast of agricultural imports and exports for 2025. They always have such a forecast in this report, but this time they didn't. It turns out, though, the numbers exist. It's not like the numbers weren't there. They exist. Last time in February, they projected an agricultural trade deficit of $49 billion for the current fiscal year. In May, they have projected a $49.5 billion agricultural trade deficit for the current fiscal year. So it's almost the same, just slightly bigger deficit.
Right.
Just slightly bigger.
Yep.
And that is, of course, despite all of Trump's wonder tariffs that have been going on for the last few months. Turns out Trump officials deliberately delayed the release of this government forecast, presumably because they thought it would be embarrassing to Trump. But someone leaked it anyway, as is their wont. A USDA spokesperson said the report was hung up in internal clearance process and was not finalised in time for its typical deadline. Given this report is not statutory, as with many other reports USDA does, the department is undergoing a review of all its non-statutory reports, including this one, to determine next steps. Now, to be fair, they didn't change any numbers. The numbers they put in there were all real numbers.
Yep.
They just withheld the single number they didn't like.
Yes.
And I don't like that one bit. We are heading down that slippery slope, Dave, towards politically manipulated official economic statistics.
Yep.
And we've got 3 years to get down there, which is a long time to slide down the slope. I am extremely nervous about this. And every single time we slide down one more inch, I'm going to let you know about it because this is my nightmare.
Yes.
So, yes. Any comments on that? No?
Nope.
Okay. You're going to love this one. You have comments on this one.
Okay.
This is the special Dave update.
Okay.
Because just like I'm going to update you guys every time there is even a hint of messing with economic statistics, I'm going to update Dave every time there is even a hint of news about the Garden of Statues, which is his favourite story in the world. For those who know what I'm talking about, the Garden of Statues is a key part of the celebrations for next year's. What's next year? It's 2026, 250th anniversary
of the American Revolution.
That's what it is. July 4th, 2026. There's doing all kinds of celebrations. There are going to be parades. There are going to be fireworks. And there's going to be a Garden of Statues. 250 life-size statues. Now, to be fair to Trump, he commissioned this more than 4 years ago.
Yeah. His first administration.
In his first administration. But everyone ignored him because they thought it was a stupid idea. And back then, he wanted it for 2026. He had the foresight. I'll give him credit. He had the foresight to have this dumb idea for like 6 years' time. And so he tried to put it in place. I'll give him credit for that. I won't give him credit for the idea, but I'll give him credit for the foresight.
What did the Biden administration do with the Garden of Statues?
They just ignored it. They completely ignored it. And so as soon as he got in now, he just re-upped it. I want a Garden of Statues in 12 months. It's a lot harder to do it in 12 months than in 6 years.
Yeah.
Trump said, it's going to be something very extraordinary. We're going to produce some of the most beautiful works of art, he says. Few problems. A year is not much time for such a big ask.
No.
$250,000 per statue, which is what's budgeted, is not much money to commission a life-size statue with if you don't want it to be shit. That's a key corollary.
Yes.
They're meant to be made.
If you go to the same people the NRL goes to, they can do it for you probably in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
They can even dress it up in some off-the-rack stuff from Lowe's.
And you can probably eat it because it's probably made of chocolate. These statues are meant to be made of marble, granite, bronze, copper, or brass. In 2022, it cost $750,000 for 2 bronze statues commissioned by, I think, Arkansas. The fine print of this executive order, it forbids abstract or modernist statues as well. And that's a problem. Well, Trump doesn't like abstract or modernist statues. This is a problem because most of the artists in America these days are abstract or modernist artists. Now, there are a couple true-to-life statue makers, but not many, especially for 250 statues. The fine art foundries that do this kind of thing in America are booked anywhere from 6 to 18 months in advance. The International Sculpture Center in America is only aware of 69 of these places in the whole country. There were 250 statues, life-size statues in a year.
They could probably get 250 statue buskers.
They probably could. But how would they make the statue buskers look like, I don't know, look like Elvis?
Well, it'll be a challenge, but it's going to be easier than what they're actually planning to do.
That's possible. But wait for it. One foundry owner said, you'd be flooding the capacity of artists in this country who do that kind of stuff and the capacity of foundries. There are places where you can really whip some stuff off, though. They can do it in China. It is possible to make these statues a little quicker if you 3D print the model and then cast it. But you know who does that best? China. So, are the statues for this tribute to America going to be all made in China? That is the question. And the answer might be they might have to be.
That would be great.
It really would. Trump's going to really not want that. Also, 4, there is still no location for the garden. Do any peppers want to host 250 god-awful statues? There might be opportunity there. If one of you guys won't volunteer, the governor of South Dakota, who is the Homeland Security Secretary, has offered a spot in the Black Hills near Mount Rushmore, apparently. But if you want people to go, it would be better to be one of the Peppers houses, surely.
Yeah, but what would it look like, though, to have all these statues clustered beneath Mount Rushmore? Pretty underwhelming, I would have thought.
I was going to say, to me, it sounds like the makings of a new Stephen King movie.
Yes.
Like, it sounds really creepy to me. But anyway, there's your update, Dave.
The pit of statues.
Do you have any thoughts about this you'd like to add? Other than,
other than this is the greatest thing in existence. I have an update of my own.
Oh, really?
Which is I realized last week I left out my favorite US trivia question of all time.
Oh, please.
So I'm going to ask you now and ask all the peppers. Which American state is geographically closest to Africa?
It's presumably going to be East Coast, not the West Coast. It's not going to be Hawaii.
That is correct. Yep.
So I'm going to guess Florida.
That would be what most people guess.
And what's the answer?
The answer is Maine. You've really got to think in terms of the east-west axis rather than the north-south axis. It's because Maine is so far east compared to the rest of the continental United States that actually makes it marginally closer to Africa than any other state.
That's an extraordinary trivia question.
You can see why it's my favourite one of all time. Unfortunately, I'll never be able to use it again because all of the Peppers know it now. But
there's a correspondence.
Yes.
With your two republics.
Yeah.
Which states were republics at one point in
Yes.
time? One of the, I think two Peppers.
Yeah.
Wasn't California a republic?
No, even though the words California Republic are on the flag, it was never actually a republic.
Wow, that's a good trick.
Yes.
Okay, I got one more update before we get into the main content.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Paramount update, which, as you know, is one of my favourite stories.
Well, you're going to say Parramatta update.
Sorry, mate. It's no rugby league update. I've told you a few times about this Paramount lawsuit. To remind you, Kamala Harris gave an answer to a question about Israel on 60 Minutes some time ago during the election campaign. It's a perfectly decent response, actually.
Yep.
It went for 2 minutes. And 60 Minutes wanted to cut it down to 30 seconds. Now, Face the Nation had already run the first minute of this 2 minute answer in one of their promos.
Yep.
But 60 Minutes wanted to cut it down further. And Trump objected to these editing choices. Now, just to be clear, I'm going to play you the whole answer. And while it's playing, I'm going to call out when the 60 Minutes interview cuts in and out and when the Face the Nation answer ends. Because the Face the Nation answer is just the first minute.
Right, okay.
Okay, so I'll tell you when the Face the Nation answer ends. I'll tell you when 60 Minutes cuts in and out, because they do cut in and out to cut it down.
Yep.
So you can see the edit as I describe. And then I'll play you the rest of the answer, which neither party used.
Okay.
And the thing to look out for, do any of these edits I'm calling out change the meaning of Harris's answer in any way? Are they deceptive in any way at all? So both Face the Nation and 60 Minutes start at the beginning, their answers. Let's play.
So yeah, just to start with Israel.
Okay.
The events of the past few weeks have pushed us to the brink, if not into, an all-out regional war in the Middle East. What can the U.S. do at this point to stop this from spinning out of control?
Well, let's start with October 7th.
60 Minutes out.
Because obviously what we do now must be in the context of what has happened. And as I reflect on a year ago and
60 Minutes in.
that 1,200 people were massacred, young people at a festival, at a music festival. 250 hostages were taken, including Americans. Women were brutally raped. And as I said then, I maintain Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters.
60 Minutes out.
And as we fast forward into what we have seen in the ensuing weeks and months,
60 Minutes in.
far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed.
60 Minutes out.
And we know that, and I think most agree, this war
60
has to
minutes in.
end. And
60
that has to
minutes
be
out.
our number one imperative. And that has been our number one imperative. How can we get this war to end? Well,
Isolation
critical
out.
elements of that are
The
we
rest
have
of
got
us
to
is-
get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. We have to get aid in. We have to lay the path toward a two-state solution. I do believe that we must maintain that as an objective, no matter how out of reach it seems at the moment. And the work that we have to do is also pay attention to what is happening every day in the region and put U.S. resources into everything we can do diplomatically and otherwise to de-escalate what is happening in the region.
Now, my take on that is that it's a perfectly acceptable answer. Nothing wrong with the answer at all. It's not stupid. It's not dumb. She's not floundering. She's giving a well-rehearsed, normal answer.
Yes.
And what 60 Minutes cut out was just a bit of hemming and hawing. Like
A bit of throat clearing, essentially.
Yeah. Like they didn't cut out anything substantial. They just
No.
cut out bullshit words.
Yes.
Bullshit words that weren't necessary, made the answer a little bit longer, but weren't stupid.
No.
They were just procrastination words.
Yes.
And that's my take. So that's your take as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me read you out an excerpt from the filing in the Paramount lawsuit the other day, because this is still in court. I'll let Trump's lawyers explain why they think that edit was so bad.
Okay.
All right. Plaintiffs, and they're talking about Trump there, were foreseeably and actually misled by defendants' advertising of defendants of 60 Minutes. defendants' advertising of the election special as containing certain statements by Harris, when in fact the election special did not contain the statements represented to be included by defendants, as well as because the interview was deceptively edited in material ways to misrepresent significant portions of what Harris said throughout her conversations with Whitaker, the 60 Minutes host. This led to widespread confusion and mental anguish of consumers, including plaintiffs, Trump, regarding a household name of the legacy media apparently deceptively distorting his broadcast and then resisting attempts to clear the public record. Moreover, because they were misled by defendants' false advertising and tampering with the entirety of the interview, viewers withheld attention from President Trump and Truth Social by directing their attention to defendants' media platforms. This increased defendants' engagement, viewership, and advertising revenue. Yes, I know. And decreased the value of President Trump's ownership in TMTG, that's Truth Social, and other media holdings. Similarly, to counteract the deception caused by defendants' false advertising of the interview and election special and tampering with the entirety of the interview, President Trump was forced to redirect significant time, money, and effort to correcting the public record regarding the content of the interview and election special. So, let me put that into plain English for people who weren't following it. You obviously were following it, Dave. That's great. I'll put it into plain English for everyone else, and then you tell me what you think. Trump is saying here, this is just my translation of what I just read. He was misled by the fact Face the Nation suggested Harris would be using the following phrases, because obviously what we do now must be in the context of what has happened, and as I reflect on a year ago and that. Also, he expected her to say, and as we fast forward into what we have seen in the ensuing weeks and months, and also he expected her to say, and we know that, and I think most agree. And also, and that has to be our number one imperative, and that has been our number one imperative, how can we get this war to end? The fact she didn't say any of those things, and only those things, in the 60 Minutes interview led to Trump having confusion and mental anguish.
Mental anguish.
And because viewers expected those statements to be in the interview, and they weren't in the interview, they stopped paying attention to Trump in the middle of an election campaign.
That is the best bit. This is the harm that's being caused.
Yes.
They were so confused.
They just stopped paying attention to Trump. And they spent all their time at the end of the election campaign looking at the 60 Minutes website instead. People were spending so much time looking at the 60 Minutes website that it decreased the value of Truth Social. And Trump was forced to spend significant time and money correcting the record during an election campaign that, in fact, 60 Minutes had cut out those critical phrases I read out, because obviously what we do now must be in the context of what has happened, and as I reflect on a year ago and that. And as we fast forward into what we have seen in the ensuing weeks and months, and we know that, and I think most agree, and that has to be our number one imperative, and that has been our number one imperative. How can we get this war to end? Now, to compensate for all that, 60 Minutes owes Trump, to compensate for his damages, $20 billion for when he spent less than $1 billion on his entire election campaign. This obviously... Oh, so Dave, so what are your comments on that?
Well, okay, so given that Truth Social pays Devin Nunes $47 million a year to be CEO, why is it... Devin Nunes should be a plaintiff as well, because if the value of Truth Social is reduced, that pay packet's going to come down. Maybe that's some of the $20 billion.
Maybe. Look, to be fair, I find it easy to believe Truth Social's value has been reduced because it is so low. It is less than $1 million.
Wow.
And in terms of revenue.
Yeah.
So
the platform that Trump posts on exclusively is worth less than $1 million.
Yes.
Now, if you're wondering why, it's because everything that he posts is immediately reported by mainstream media. So nobody needs to be on Truth Social at all.
Yes, that's true. But anyway, this obviously is an incredibly moronic lawsuit, obviously. The only reason anyone would take this seriously at all is because Paramount won permission from Trump's Federal Communications Commission to undertake an $8 billion merger with Skydance Media.
Right.
And the super corrupt chair of that said commission, Brendan Carr, has openly said that he would be unlikely to grant that permission while this lawsuit is still going, even though everyone knows it's junk. Paramount, here's the update. Paramount has apparently offered Trump $15 million to settle this cesspool of a lawsuit. And Trump rejected it. He's demanding $25 million plus an apology.
Jesus.
Which is so incredibly dodgy. Now, apparently this is the reason why CBS has been shedding staff recently. They just shed the CBS News CEO, Wendy McMahon, last week. She resigned because she couldn't tolerate the idea of apologising to Trump for doing nothing wrong.
Yeah.
The chair of Paramount, Sherry Redstone, is very happy for them to do whatever it takes to get this merger over the line, although she has supposedly stepped back, so there's no conflict of interest. Sure. The other interesting update here is that Santo's Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders and Ron Wyden have written to Paramount telling them that they plan to investigate whether the deal, should it go through, involves bribery. Because the settlement is so not a legitimate settlement, so obviously not a legitimate settlement, that could be considered a payoff for a favour.
Wow.
Paramount are hoping by settling for about the same number as other media companies have settled for equally dubious lawsuits, i.e. $25 million for Meta, $15 million for ABC, $10 million for X, they might get away with it. But if the Democrats decide that they can't get Trump with his immunity, so instead they're going to settle for getting anyone who enables Trump, like Paramount.
Yes.
This could be a very interesting development.
It really could.
Yeah. All right, let's do some content. I've talked enough, so why don't we start with one of yours, Dave? Why don't we start with Hegseth versus Australia?
Hegseth versus Australia. Now, initially this didn't look like Hegseth versus Australia because Hegseth seemed to be getting on very well with Australia's Defence Minister, Richard Marles. So this was happening at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, and Hegseth was, in general, giving a lot of speeches about how all of these allies in the region needed to contribute a lot more to defence spending. Richard Marles responded by saying, yes, that's true, because we can't rely on the US to defend us forever. And he was talking about projections for increased Australian defence spending, which it's currently a little bit above 2%. Treasury projects it will be 2.33% by, I think, 2033.
Taking their time.
Okay, yes. So that all happened on the weekend, and then at some point on Sunday, Trump said that Australia should raise its defence spending to 3% of GDP.
Okay.
Now, Marles didn't have anything to say in response to that. The Prime Minister instead responded to that, Anthony Albanese, and perhaps a little bit out of character from what we've seen over the last 3 years, he said, Australia is going to decide its defence spending.
Oh.
Now, that's about as big a repudiation as you will hear an Australian Prime Minister make of a US president.
If he doesn't watch out, he's going to lose the next election because of Cook's Law. He's going to make himself interesting. For those that don't remember, I'm talking about Cook's Law is the most boring option, always wins the next election.
Yeah. That's correct. So, Albanese was widely applauded by most of the Australian media for this, and I think that he said the right thing. What I want to talk about, though, is what I see as an increasingly kind of just badly misplaced convention about talking of defence needs in terms of percentage of GDP, okay? Trump saying Australia should be spending 3% of its GDP on defence. That's a variation on a theme that he's been going on for a long time about all these other countries should be raising their defence spending to this specific level of GDP. Back in January, he was actually saying 5%. 5% of GDP. US spends 3.4% of its GDP on military spending. Now, does it ever strike you as odd that we talk about defence in terms of percentage of GDP?
A little bit.
Yeah, because we don't really talk about any other kind of government policy in this way, do we?
I mean, especially when you're talking about a place like Australia, where our GDP is so much bigger than us as a country. I mean,
Yes.
I don't mean size. I mean in terms of like population and stuff. Like we have a very large GDP for a country of 26 million people. And so that's a pretty big bite when
Yes.
you're talking about as a percentage of GDP.
Yes, yeah. It is a very big bite, okay? But for example, you wouldn't say our health spending needs to be 10% of GDP. Our education spending needs to be 5% of GDP. We just don't talk about policy in those terms. We say Australia needs to raise its life expectancy, or Australia needs to get literacy up to certain levels. Why don't we talk about defence in the same way?
I suppose that, I mean, you might probably have an answer, but my guess off the top of my head would be because Australia just simply is never going to be able to defend itself because we're such a geographically large country. It's just impossible. And so we're never going to be able to meet any goal of actual some kind of quantifiable security level.
Well, I mean, let's talk about where this convention of talking about defence needs in terms of percentage of GDP actually comes from.
Sure.
Right? It comes from NATO.
Yes.
So this is something that NATO, the 2% of GDP target for NATO countries, that's been talked about since 2014. Now, you'll notice 2014, that's when the invasion of Crimea happened.
Yes.
So in 2014, NATO members in Europe are starting to think very seriously about we are actually going to need NATO for collective defence, which is what the purpose of it is. The key word there is collective.
Yes.
It can't really be collective defence if countries aren't contributing. So looking at the structure of NATO, which I think has 30-something members, the best kind of shorthand for talking about this and the best way that they had of signalling political commitment was to put in place this target of 2% of GDP spending for every country. Rather than saying, Portugal, you need to buy a certain number of ships. Germany, you need to buy a certain number of tanks. Instead, it was this very clean kind of idea.
Shorthand.
To show that we are serious about collective security, every country needs to be pledging that they spend a certain amount on security. Now, that, I think, makes a lot of sense in that context. And I think that it makes sense in general when you're talking in broad deterrence terms, right? So there was certainly a period of America's existence where the United States was spending literally more than every other country in the world put together on defense. Now, to be able to say we spend more than every other country in the world put together on defense, that's a pretty effective deterrent statement, right?
Yes.
Now, it masks some of the underlying facts. Like part of that is to do with how strong the US dollar was. Like, so China would get a lot more bang for its buck in terms of, the pay for a Chinese soldier is obviously way less than the pay for a US soldier.
Sure.
Nonetheless, if you're saying like we are spending just this colossal amount on defense compared to everybody else, that's a pretty good projection of strength. But I'm going to suggest that just talking exclusively about defense needs in terms of percentage of GDP in this way is very misguided because it just does not make sense in every context. In Australia, before the election, the coalition was trying to come up with a defence policy. So they went to Andrew Hastie, who is one of the brighter stars in the coalition firmament, somebody who has served in the military.
Somebody who has a seat.
Yes. In Western Australia. No, he's got the last coalition seat left in Perth.
Yes.
Yes. And he came up with this really detailed list of things that he thinks Australia needs.
Okay.
Right? Like everything from ships to ammunition. This is what
Sure.
Australia actually needs.
Yeah.
In the end, none of that got mentioned. Instead, Peter Dutton just said, we're going to 4%.
Right. Gotcha. I suppose also there's an element with America. I mean, I definitely take what you're saying about NATO. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
But there's probably an element with America as well where like at the moment, they're never far away from trying to feather their nest.
Yes,
Right?
that is true.
And when you say, got to be 3%
Yeah,
GDP or 3.5% of GDP or whatever it may be, they know what that means is buying American product.
Yes, exactly.
And they'd be very happy with that.
Exactly, yes. But you're not really talking about actual defence needs. And another example of this, which was just being reported on today, is one of the Trump directives is to increase defence spending by 13%, right, which will take the Department of Defence's budget beyond $1 trillion.
Yes.
But members of Congress are incredibly frustrated because there has been no actual list of funding requests.
Yes.
Right? In other words, no actual instructions about what are you going to spend this extra 13% on. It's just we want to spend another 13%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I don't think any of this is actually directed towards defence needs. You need to think concretely in terms of what you actually need to keep a country safe.
And there's plenty of defence needs for
There
America.
are plenty of
but
defence needs.
I take your point, but in this budgeting request,
Yes.
they might not be listed. Yeah.
I know people who are very frustrated about the fact, for example, that while the United States is talking about Golden Dome, it has ships that desperately need to be replaced.
Yes. Yeah. The shipbuilding seems to be a real big issue, especially with Taiwan.
Yes. Yeah. So, there are actual defense needs that need to be met. And just talking about things in terms of percentages of spending or percentages of GDP is not actually talking about those needs. Why are people afraid to have the actual discussion about needs? Now, there could be some kind of security reason for that. Maybe you don't want to talk about the vulnerabilities in your defense too much.
But Trump's allergic to details
Yeah.
for everything, not just defense.
But maybe also it would lead to some very hard conversations about how much of this money that the US has spent over the last, say, 70 years has actually been spent very well or very wisely.
Well,
How much of what's being spent now is actually being spent very well or very wisely. And that gets us to this big point about defense spending in the US, which is it is always the most massive exception to demands for we need more efficiency. Right? Doge did not touch the Department of Defense. That is where the biggest cost overruns, the most massive delays, the hugest inefficiencies, the most lavish sinecures, all of that is going on in the Defense Department.
Yeah. The defense is where they don't make choices.
Yes.
They just go, okay, should we be ready for this? Should we be ready for that?
Yes.
Should we be ready for that?
Yeah.
Yes. We should be ready for everything.
Yes.
And I think what they're trying to avoid is having a strategy of actually moving in just one direction
Yes.
and budgeting for that direction.
Yes.
It's that's something they just refuse to do.
Yes. Yeah. And, because that would be a serious change to the way that the US goes about defense. I'm going to read you something,
Please.
which I think is very pertinent about, this pathological way of thinking about defense. Okay, I want you to guess who actually wrote this.
Okay.
Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its labours, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete highway. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This, I repeat, is the best way of life to be found on the road that the world has been taking. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. Who said that?
This might be...
Was it William Jennings Bryan? Was it George McGovern? Was it Jesse Jackson?
This might be foolish. I'm going to go, just simply from the way it was written, I'm going for Reagan.
No. It was Dwight Eisenhower.
Ah, damn it.
Yes. So that was Dwight Eisenhower's Cross of Iron speech from 1953. Now, his exit speech, where he introduced the term military-industrial complex, is a much better known speech. But that speech, which is from 7 years earlier, shows that even though, he was in favour of massively ramped up defence spending, but he knew what the consequences of it were. And he said very clearly what the consequences of it were then. Now, defence creates needs that do need to be met. Okay? And I know plenty of people in Australia who have said very specific things about the ways in which Australia's defence spending needs to be increased in their view. Now, I'm not saying whether they are right or wrong. I'm just saying they at least get into the specifics of what Australia needs. There are plenty of people in the US who get into the specifics of what the US needs. But you are never going to get into those specifics just by talking about percentages of GDP or percentages of spending. Instead, you are getting into cross of iron thinking, right? Just that we need to spend this money because it's important that we spend it on defence and it doesn't matter what we spend it on, not thinking about the other things that money could be spent on.
That is fair enough.
So I'm not sure if Pete Hegseth comments deserve to be thought about in that much depth.
To be fair, with Australia, if when Australia ordered something from America, they didn't say, yeah, we'll send you in 15 years' time, then they might be able to spend a little bit more on defence then.
Yeah.
Because what anything that Australia asks for is going to be for 10 years' time.
Yes.
So think about that, hey.
When... I was just thinking, when AUKUS was first announced, I remember the price tag that was being quoted in the Australian media was between $268 and $368 billion. I remember thinking, that is the weirdest combination of vague and precise that I've ever heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
I imagine, I'm guessing that 268 billion was the price tag they worked out, or 318 billion maybe in the middle.
Yes.
And then they just said, well, inflation could be that much or that much.
Probably.
I'm assuming that's what they did. But
yes.
It is funny. It's a funny observation.
Yeah.
By the way, just quickly before we move on, I just say, just on Hegseth, one thing about Hegseth, he does some zany things and he gets criticised a bit. But there is one thing which I think we should give credit for Hegseth, and that is Hegseth does, I think like an army person, as in a grunt. He thinks like the people he's trying to recruit. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the stuff he does from a commander's perspective is probably pretty dumb. But you can't ignore how well the army has been, the entire military has been doing with recruiting ever since Hegseth took over.
Oh, okay. What have they been doing?
Well, they've already met their targets for this year. And that has not happened for a while. They're doing really well with the recruitment.
Is that the Hegseth factor, or is that let's go and get a job that is not going to be extinct once the recession comes along.
No, I think, look, it could be a Trump factor rather than Hegseth factor, but definitely it's before any tariffs. It was, I remember reading in January that already there was an increase in recruitment. And in February, it really went off. And at that point in time, they totally knew about Hegseth. They totally knew about Trump. And that was before all the tariff stuff. So I think it is because of them. I mean, I'm not saying, therefore they're excellent. I'm just saying that is a positive.
Okay.
That the military have struggled for recruitment for some time until this year.
Okay. I would like to see a little bit more evidence that that's the reason,
fine.
but yes.
No, fair enough.
Yes.
And he does do some not great things. Like I haven't mentioned, for instance, them renaming the ship Harvey Milk.
Yes.
And also that they have planned to rename the ships Thurgood Marshall, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Harriet Tubman, Dolores Huerta, Lucy Stone, Cesar Chavez, and Medgar Evers. Interesting. I wonder what they all have in common.
There was also the disclosure on an unsecured chat that they were going to start a war with Yemen, even though they didn't need to.
So, yes.
A war that they subsequently lost.
Yeah. My point is they're not beyond criticism.
Yes.
I'm just saying that Hegseth does have some fringe benefits.
All
right. Let's talk about the big, beautiful bill.
Oh, yes.
Or should we call it what Trump did, which was arguably the most significant piece of legislation that will ever be signed in the history of our country. That is an argument I'd like to take the other side of.
Or should we call it what Elon Musk called it, which was the disgusting abomination?
Oh, we'll get there, Dave. You know we'll get there. Yes. Before we get to Musk,
yes,
I want to talk about a couple other things at the big, beautiful bill. Then we'll get there. First of all, I want to talk about a program which we haven't mentioned, which is because you keep on reading more and more about this bill. It's 1,000 pages. The special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, otherwise known as WIC, Women, Infants, Children. It's a program that's been around for about 50 years for poor children, pregnant women, and breastfeeding women only to have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. That's what it's for. That's it.
That seems both modest and worthwhile.
Yeah. Now, to qualify, you got to live in a household with an income at or below 185% of the federal poverty line. Plus, you need to be judged nutritionally at risk by either a healthcare professional or a nutrition expert. Okay, so as you say, they're not throwing money around here.
No.
It's very targeted. About 6.7 million people are currently on it. 1.5 million mothers, 1.5 million infants, 3.7 million children under 5. 5, you get cut off. It offers a lot of bang for your buck, this program, because it contributes to healthier births.
Yes.
And healthy, like not being an underweight birth makes such a big difference to the rest of your life in terms of health. It leads to improved infant feeding practices, which once again, lifetime payoffs. Better healthcare for children, lifetime payoffs. Higher academic achievement for students, lifetime payoffs. This is huge bang for your buck. It leads to long-term benefits for kids that's worth so much more than the program itself costs. Take a guess how much it costs. I just told you how many people are on it. 6.7 million people. Take a guess how much it costs. Per year.
$36 million.
Okay, that's not much.
It's like
that serves me right. Not nearly that little. $7 billion a year for a nationwide program that's helping nutrition. That's compared to SNAP.
Yes.
Okay, all right. That is not much. And the increases in the cost of this program have literally never been opposed by either party in the past because everyone recognizes it's worthwhile. It offers only a very limited number of foods: whole grain bread, baby food, infant formula, milk. And they give you a cash card, a card that can only be used to buy fruit and vegetables. Okay, so very, very targeted.
Yes.
And it's stingy as all hell. There's a reason it only costs $7 billion. Right now, It offers for a month of fruit and veggies for a woman, $54.
That's not very much.
No, it's not. For a child, a month of fruit and veggies, it offers $13 per month. That they've calculated is half the cost of the recommended daily servings. So we're not talking rivers of gold here, okay? The big, beautiful bill cuts that from $54 a month for a woman to $27 a month for a woman, and from $13 a month for a child to $10 a month for a child. There is no suggestion.
In other words, we're cutting it down to Trump's lifetime budget for fruit and vegetables.
You reckon he's had $10 of fruit and vegetables in his life? I think that's very generous. There is no suggestion that those cuts are to reduce waste or fraud. In fact, there is no spin whatsoever for
vegetable
these cuts.
card fraud.
like they're making no attempt to spin this. They're just making the cuts. There's no justification. They're just making the cut. They want money. Here's money.
You've eaten your last taxpayer-funded cucumber, missy.
Apparently. I mean, you get to the point where it's not even worth their while to apply for the program if you're getting this little money. I'm saying might as well just get rid of it. But that is, I think, one of the scummier cuts in the big, beautiful
That
bill.
is incredibly scummy.
Yeah. And it's talk kind of if he knows to spite your face in terms of the benefits.
Yes.
So that is a program which we haven't mentioned, which I wanted to mention.
Yep.
Another thing which I wanted to mention because it was in the news was AI regulation.
Yep.
Quote, no state or political subdivision thereof may enforce during the 10-year period beginning on the date of enactment of this act any law or regulation limiting, restricting or otherwise regulating artificial intelligence model, artificial intelligence systems or automated decision systems entered into interstate commerce. So the feds are taking over AI regulation for 10 years. Interesting. Marjorie Taylor Greene she tweeted about this. She said, full transparency, I didn't know about this section. I'm adamantly opposed to this. And it is a violation of state rights, and I would have voted no if I had known this was in there.
Deal breaker.
We have no idea what AI will be capable of in the next 10 years, and giving it free rein and tying states' hands is potentially dangerous. This needs to be stripped out in the Senate. When the OBBB comes back to the House for approval after Senate changes, I will not vote for it with this in it, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It is rare that politicians openly admit to voting on bills that they haven't read. But yeah, good on her for...
It's equally rare that I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene about something.
I'm shocked that she would explicitly say, I am not going to vote for a Trump bill if it has this in it. Now, I'm not sure I'd trust her that she'll follow through on that. But, yeah, I will give her credit to this point in time, apart from the bit where she didn't read the bill she voted on. I won't give her credit for that. And by the way, for those who say, oh, well, it's not her fault that she had 3 hours to vote on it before. Yeah, it is her fault.
It is absolutely
because
her
she
fault.
has a vote.
Yes.
And she could have said, I'm not voting for this unless we have another week.
Yes.
That is up to her.
Yes.
And she chose not to. And she ain't the only one who didn't read this bill, I promise you. So it is on every single one of the people who didn't read this that they didn't read it.
As far as I'm aware, it was only Thomas Massey who was saying I'm going to vote against this because we haven't even had a chance to read it.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go through the latest spin. There are 4 bits of latest spin.
Ooh.
Can you update all the spin?
Set those plates spinning.
First one, Medicaid spin. The work requirement spin hasn't been working so well with Medicaid.
No.
It hasn't been working at all. So we're seeing
it has not.
a bit more of the suggestion that the main cuts are for illegal immigrants. I have some examples for you here.
This bill doesn't cut Medicaid. What it does is it says that for illegal immigrants, there will be cuts, but
we are not cutting Medicaid in this package. There's a lot of misinformation out there about this, Jake. The numbers of Americans who are affected are those that are entwined in our work to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. So what do I mean by that? You got more than 1.4 million illegal aliens on Medicaid. Medicaid is not intended for non-U.S. citizens.
The problem with this, and I'm not sure if I've said this on PEP or not, but I'm going to say it now. News you can use, folks. This bill does not save 1 cent from getting illegal immigrants off Medicaid. Not 1 cent. There are illegal immigrants on Medicaid in a bunch of states. Usually they're children. Not always. Sometimes they're adults.
Yes.
Since the federal government bans funding illegal immigrants on Medicaid, though, the feds spend not 1 cent on those illegal immigrants. The states spend the money on illegal immigrants on Medicaid. The states that want to do that, like California, for instance, right? California spends 100% of the bill of illegal immigrants on Medicaid. 100%. It's literally illegal for the feds to spend a cent on that. Now, this bill, what it does is it reduces the federal government rebate to states that pay for illegal immigrants' Medicaid costs.
Yes.
Not the rebate for the illegal immigrants.
No.
Because they get no rebate. It's those states are paying 100% of that bill. I'm talking about the rebate for actual citizens on Medicaid. So maybe they might convince all those states to stop paying for illegal immigrant Medicaid. But if they do, the feds won't save any money. Only those states would save money. So that is an intentionally bogus talking point right there. First bit of spin.
Well spotted.
Thank you. Second bit of spin, growth spin. John Thune, responding to Elon Musk, we'll get to that, said, you're not considering the supercharged growth.
He's accepting the CBO assumptions that are built upon a static scoring assessment of the effect, the macroeconomic effect, growth effect, that these changes will have on our economy. And all the modeling that we've seen suggests that the changes that are being made in the tax policy, particularly making permanent bonus depreciation, interest deductibility, R&D expensing, are going to lead to significant growth. And you couple the growth with the biggest spending reduction in American history, and you will see a reduction, not an increase in the deficit.
Almost all of this bill is maintaining the status quo. Almost the entirety of it.
Yep.
So I don't know how you're supercharging growth when you're not making any changes. It's not going to happen, guys. Every single time when you cut taxes, the Republicans say, the growth is going to pay for for these tax cuts, and it's going to end up being surplus. And it never is. It's never close. But in every other tax cut in history, you got a better case than this one.
Yes.
Because usually they're actually tax cuts. In this case, it's a tax cut that's just maintaining what's already there.
Yeah.
So never going to happen in a million years.
It really, I don't think there's ever been something more specifically calibrated to sound clever to people who don't know what they're talking about than the Laffer curve idea, right? The idea that a tax cut will actually pay for itself, will more than pay for itself, because it will generate so much economic growth that, you'll get increased revenue.
If you want to look up the Laffer curve, it's L-A-F-F-E-R.
Yes. Now, Art Laffer, he was quite young when he first drew that on the back of a cocktail napkin. And he's still around. He still exercises significant influence on the Republican Party. And this idea has never worked, except in the sense of it allows people like that to sound extremely smug when they say, well, you're just going off this static modeling, not the dynamic modeling.
Yes.
Yeah, and for 20 years or more, I've been hearing people say this shit in exactly the same tone of voice. And it is just never true. It's never remotely true. But there's this sort of cultic belief in it.
To be fair,
yes,
dynamic modeling does end up with different numbers to static modeling.
Totally, yes.
And it's true that there is a stimulus effect of a tax cut.
Yeah.
It's not like it makes zero difference.
No.
But the idea that it makes all the difference
Yes.
is just fiction.
It is total fiction.
Yes.
And look at what happened when these tax cuts were actual tax cuts back in 2017. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. What was the biggest economic effect of these tax cuts? It was not an increase in GDP. which that just kept on going along at the same level that had been going for the last 3 years of the Obama presidency. It certainly was not an increase in revenue. It was a massive share buyback scheme.
Yes, it was.
That's what it was.
Next bit of spin is that CBO is political. Caroline Levitt tried this one on.
The Congressional Budget Office has been historically wrong. In fact, they predicted the Trump tax cuts from the president's first term in 2017. Their prediction was wrong by $500 billion. Those tax cuts had nearly $500 billion more of revenue than the Congressional Budget Office scored. And I would also point out, I don't think many people know this, there hasn't been a single staffer in the entire Congressional Budget Office that has contributed to a Republican since the year 2000. But guess what? There have been many staffers within the Congressional Budget Office who have contributed to Democrat candidates and politicians every single cycle since. So unfortunately, this is an institution in our country that has become partisan and political.
Yeah, that was always coming. Remember 2 weeks ago, I was grateful for the CBO not being dragged into partisan smears.
I do remember that.
Can never have good things for long, sadly. Reminder, the current director of the CBO is Philip Swagel, a Republican who previously worked in the Bush administration, and he also spent time at the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank.
It's not going to be very long before the AEI gets labelled a radical left think tank
It's on its way.
by the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then the final one is deficit spin, which is the funniest spin for me because it's just so obviously wrong. OMB chief Russell Vought tried this one out, and he looks so earnest too. It's just there's a bit of a. I think he has a certain psychopathic quality to him where when he's lying, you would totally believe he's not lying. You go, he doesn't understand. He can't understand it because just look at him. Look how genuine he seems. Look how earnest he seems. But man, I promise you, he knows he's lying here. He said this bill doesn't increase the deficit, because you shouldn't count the tax cut in your budgeting because they're only extending a tax cut that already exists. This is his argument.
I love Elon. This bill doesn't increase the deficit or hurt the debt. In fact, it lowers it by $1.4 trillion. What some of the watchdogs have done is they have used CBO's artificial baseline, which doesn't allow and assume that current tax law will be extended because of sunsets that are in the law. They don't do that with suspending. It is totally something that would be foreign to any common sense person who comes and looks at how we budget in this country. And so when you assume the extension of the president's tax relief from 2017, this budget or this bill, and it's really a reconciliation bill. It's not really a budget bill. It is using a budget process. This is a $1.4 trillion over 10 years deficit reduction. It's $1.6 trillion in mandatory savings. Obviously, we have a little bit of spending in there as well for border and defense. But that is the biggest mandatory savings package that we have seen since the 1970s, 1997. It's very historic.
What garbage. Honestly, like anyone would say, it's common sense to not count the extension of a tax cut in your budgeting. The money doesn't just come from nowhere, champ. You still have to borrow it. Hence, increasing the debt and the deficit because there's borrowing being done. Oh, my God, Dave. That's the argument they're running.
That's common sense in the Trump administration.
It's actually a $1.4 trillion surplus if you just ignore the tax cut. Common sense. Common sense. All right. You got anything to say about any of this before we get into the Senate politics?
I just remembered Art Laffer's original book was called How the World Works.
Wow.
Yes.
Thanks for teaching us, Art.
Yes.
Okay, Senate, you need 4 no's to sink this bill. There are heaps of people who've already intimated no in a quiet, sotto voce way.
Yes.
Hawley, Murkowski, Collins have all indicated the Medicare cuts are too steep.
Yep.
Rick Scott, Roger Marshall, Ron Johnson, John Kennedy have all said there need to be steeper cuts. Ron Johnson has made, so they're contradictory, those two, if you haven't noticed. Ron Johnson has made a critical point in particular, surprisingly from Ron Johnson. Have you been watching what the bond markets are doing in relation to the one big, beautiful bill? They're not thinking it's a very big, beautiful bill.
I mean, they're thinking it's big.
Yeah, that's true. And that is a crucial point from Ron Johnson.
It really is.
Because the bond market could play a huge role in this one.
It really could.
In a way that it just hasn't before in America.
I mean, the bond market has always played a big role, but you just don't hear about it or think about it because presidents are generally so wary of anything that could upset the bond market that they don't go to these places in the first place. So I think Bill Clinton, soon after he became president, forlornly said, "Is my whole agenda basically in the hands of the bond market?" And he was told, yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, James Carville, I don't remember the quote off the top of my head, but there was a famous quote from him saying, if I could be reincarnated as something, it's the bond market.
It's the bond market.
Because everyone's freaking scared of that thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So the bond market is always there. It always does play a major role. It just doesn't get tested very often. But it is really getting tested now.
Yeah. Well, if it starts to play havoc,
yes,
it could make an impact here.
It could make a huge impact. And so, I mean, there are a couple of reasons why. Probably the most immediate one is when those bond yields increase, that means that the cost of borrowing is inevitably going to go up.
Yeah.
Right? Because when bonds are competing with other lenders. Okay, they're essentially one of the biggest lenders in the market. When they're putting their prices up, everybody's prices are going to go up.
And when Dave says the cost of borrowing, he means for everyone. He
Yes.
means credit card debt. He means car loans. He means
Yes.
house loans.
Yes, yeah. Interest rates are going to come up, and that is because if bonds are offering, more on this yield, other sources of borrowing are going to need to offer higher interest rates in order to attract investors, right? So it all goes on. That's the first big thing. The second big thing, I mean, that is scary enough, but the second big thing that people are afraid of is essentially loss of faith in the United States government, loss of faith in the US dollar, like complete change in the economic status of the United States as holding the world, as printing the world's reserve currency, of being, the big safe haven in terms of bonds. This is the last safe haven to actually park your money. All of that is potentially under threat from the bond market, and as well, of course, just as the massive potential increase in debt service that this represents.
Absolutely.
So it's a pretty scary thing when the bond market starts to go in this direction.
So I've just described for you two groups of people. Each group is big enough to sink this bill.
Yes.
And those two groups contradict each other.
Yes.
So that's a bad position for the bill to be in.
It's a very bad position for the bill to be in.
And I haven't even mentioned Rand Paul, who is the one who's doing the most talking.
Yes.
Most of the people I just talked about, aren't doing much speaking. I mean, they're making a comment or two on the Sunday show, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Rand Paul is tweeting constantly about how he's going to vote no. And not just that, he's saying 4 people. He knows of 4 people who agree with him. Well, he's got a third issue here.
Yeah.
He says he'll vote for the bill as it is, but only if the debt ceiling rise is either taken out of it or is much smaller. That's how he puts it.
So I've told him if they strip out the debt ceiling, I'll consider, even with the imperfections, voting for the rest of the bill. But I can't vote to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. There's got to be someone left in Washington who thinks debt is wrong and deficits are wrong and wants to go in the other direction. I offered an amendment 2 weeks ago to raise the debt ceiling for 3 months. That's $500 billion, believe it or not, for 3 months. And the reason I do it every 3 months and force the vote is it's a point of leverage. It's an inflection point at which we can look back at leadership and say, you promised you were going to cut spending. Oh, you promised tomorrow. You promised next week. You promised next year. But you know what? You're not doing it, so I'm not going to raise it again. So this leverage would work.
Okay, so Rand Paul says there's there's at least 4 of us in the Senate who feel the same way. So if there's now 3 groups of people, each of which who can sink this bill if they don't get their way, and they all want different things and they're all kind of contradictory.
Yeah.
They've got the problem, especially that last one with Rand Paul, because if he's right, there are 4 Senate Republicans who will vote against the bill if they don't get what Rand Paul asks. They're doomed.
Yes.
Because there's literally no way that the Republicans can place that gun to their own heads that Rand Paul is asking for there.
Yeah.
Where every 3 months on the way to a midterms that they already think they're going to lose, they're going to have a debt ceiling fight?
Yeah.
Come on. They're not going to do that.
No.
And so that is, remember, every debt ceiling fight is risking a debt default, which is huge, so much bigger than a shutdown. So he is the most suicidal of all of them. Like and his group, if he's leading more than one person, then they're a real issue. And so then it's interesting that Trump didn't say anything about the first 2 groups, but Trump's been attacking Rand Paul because he knows that path is death for this bill, right? So Trump comes over the top and he dive bombs Rand Paul on Truth Social. First of all, Rand Paul has very little understanding of the BBB, especially the tremendous growth that is coming. He loves voting no on everything. He thinks it's good politics, but it's not. The BBB is a big winner. And then 5 minutes later, he does a lap, turns around and swoops for another dive bomb. Rand votes no on everything, but never has any practical or constructive ideas. His ideas are actually crazy. Losers. The people of Kentucky can't stand him. This is a big growth bill. Okay, now we've seen this millions of times before from Trump. When he identifies a target, he just focuses on them. He obsesses about them, and you can't fight it. He owns Twitter, like effectively.
Yes.
He's not the actual owner. But he effectively owns social media. No one has his megaphone. Best thing you can do is surrender from a self-preservation perspective. But then we saw something extremely unusual.
What's that?
We saw Godzilla emerge from the waters to take on King Kong when the actual owner of Twitter shows up.
Oh!
This is that moment. It was that moment when Elon Musk weighed in.
Yes.
When Trump was going Rand Paul,
Wow.
the guy who he saw as the actual impediment of this bill,
Yes.
and then Elon Musk said, no, get stuffed.
Wow.
I'm going to take you on, Sonny. And then Elon Musk tweeted about 10 times the next hour in an Elon Musk kind of way. And I'll go all right
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
This is your favorite tweet.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who vote for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. That's actually my favorite bit. The you know you did wrong. You know it. So that tweet in itself is very negative.
Yes.
But the context is so much worse.
Yes.
He might as well be saying that directly at Trump's face.
Yes.
In response to Trump trying to discipline someone.
Yes.
Like that is as close to a challenge to Trump's authority as we have ever seen.
Wow.
Like from someone who's big enough to take him on. That was huge. So now I've set you up for Elon. You can just keep on going from there if you want.
No, I want you to keep
You
going.
want to keep going? Okay. All right then. All right. I'll read some more of the tweets because there's a stack of them. It will massively increase the already gigantic budget deficit to $2.5 trillion, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, and burden America's citizens with crushingly unsustainable debt. Next one. Congress is making America bankrupt with this scary looking graph. Next one. Mammoth spending bills are bankrupting America. Another scary graph. So this completely screwed up Trump's influence effort. And you know what Trump did?
What?
Nothing.
No.
He went silent. Like he just couldn't compete. And then Rand Paul immediately brandished Musk's support because he knew what was going on.
Yes.
And Rand Paul responds to one of them with, I agree with Elon. We have both seen the massive waste in government spending and we know another $5 trillion in debt is a huge mistake. We can and must do better. And then Musk replies to that tweet with an American flag. Oh my God. He's calling Trump unpatriotic. That's what he's doing.
Wow.
Like, you could not be more aggressive in the way he addressed this.
Yes.
It was huge. I've never seen a Republican so brazenly take Trump on when he's trying to bully a politician online before. Never. And it's on the issue that's most critical to Trump's administration.
Yes.
So that to me is amazing. Okay, so my first question then is, this is my question to you.
Yep.
What is going on? Why would Elon Musk do this? Why would Elon Musk do it now? He could have talked about it a month ago. He could have talked about this when it was in the budget committee in the House.
Yes.
When it would have been easiest to sink, easiest to change, and least skin off Trump's nose.
Yes.
The longer it goes, the more it's a direct confrontation with Donald Trump. If he'd gone early, he could have got it changed. And it wouldn't have been a big issue for Trump.
Isn't there?
Just wait till now.
Isn't there a very obvious answer to this?
You tell me your obvious answer.
A month ago, he was still part of the administration.
Yeah.
A month ago, he was still on good terms with Trump.
Is he not on good terms with Trump
A
now?
month ago, he was still on good terms with Trump's supporters.
He just received a golden key. Like literally a couple of days ago, he got a golden key.
Musk is very worried that he is going to get blamed for everything that goes wrong in the Trump administration. So Musk has been spending the last few weeks defending his work with Doge.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, there is something of a heightened awareness in America of exactly how crap Doge has been, okay, of how little money it even by its own bullshit estimations, how little money it saved compared to what it was supposed to save. There is a heightened awareness of the fact that Doge is actually costing America money in all kinds of ways, everything from lawsuits to efficiency losses from what they're doing. And speaking of efficiency losses, the Washington Post had a really good report on this yesterday. All of the different ways in which Doge is making government departments less efficient. Because, yes, it turns out if you actually have to justify every purchase to a political appointee, that takes up a lot of time.
Time is money.
If you are only allowed to use vendors in foreign countries who are prepared to sign statements saying that they don't have anything to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, you soon find that you have to look for a long time to find vendors. All of these things that we remember Musk complaining about, like invoice fields left blank, all of these sort of things that he was alleging were this was just evidence of waste or fraud. No, this was actually evidence of people who had been doing their jobs for a long time, doing them in the most efficient way possible, right? Which actually means skipping on some paperwork some of the time when it's not necessary to the function of what you're doing. Now, from Musk's point of view, because he's got this private sector suspicion of all non-government employees, of all government employees, that they're lazy and venal, which is really pure projection. He believes if they're not filling out every little bit of paperwork, that must mean because they're robbing the taxpayer or because they're just refusing to do anything, because they're not even turning up to work at all. Because if they're not in the office, you can't surveil them, right? There's a lot waiting to be written about how the back to the office movement doesn't do anything for efficiency. It is just every petty tyrant boss's dream of the fact that their employees have to look at them all day. None of this is about efficiency, right? Oh, maybe Musk thought it was, but none of it actually results in efficiency. Having to do all of this extra paperwork, which then gets sent to political appointees for sign-off when they've got other things to do. You know what that is called, colloquially? There's its term for it. Red tape.
Yes.
Doge has vastly increased the amount of red tape in America because of suspicion of government employees. People have a lot of legitimate gripes about the kind of red tape that government imposes on everyone else. But imposing vast amounts of red tape on government isn't making government any more efficient. Anyway, Musk is aware of the fact that even a lot of people who were previously sympathetic to Doge now see it as a massive failure. Not only do they see it as a massive failure, they see it as something that is very useful to blame when things go wrong for Trump. Okay, so I think he's conscious of that, and I think he is starting to fight back preemptively.
Okay, my next question then is,
Yes.
why has he done it with such venom? Because he didn't need to do it this way. He could have just tweeted once.
Yeah.
In response to Rand Paul and done the job. But he just went over and over and over again. To me, it read like he's passionate and angry and taking something personally.
Have you ever known Musk, though, to only tweet once when he could tweet 15 times?
Well, there is that. There is that. There is that. Well, let me throw to you
Okay.
4 theories from Axios.
Okay.
Because Axios has been doing plenty of chatting to anonymous sources. And I have to say, some of these theories ring quite true to me.
Yes.
And none of the theories is that Elon Musk is actually genuinely angry about the deficit.
Of course not.
Okay. Theory 1. Elon Musk has spent the last few months claiming to want to destroy the electric vehicle tax credit. We've all heard him say this.
Mm-hmm.
He says Tesla doesn't need it, whereas the other EV companies in America do. But the theory is that this is bullshit. And behind the scenes, he's actually been lobbying to keep the EV credit. And so he wants to kill the bill to save his electric vehicle credit.
Right.
Now, my take on that is that could be true. But if that was the reason behind what we just saw over the last few days, he would have tried to kill it earlier.
Right. Yep.
There's something about right now that set him off and made him emotional and to go on a spree like that. And I don't think this is that. But yeah, but maybe this is part of it. I don't know. You got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it doesn't seem big enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next one. I told you a few months back about how Musk was parachuted into air traffic control to try to sort out what's going on there. I don't think I told you, Dave. I think I told Lockie.
Okay.
And Musk decided that he should replace the extremely lucrative long-term Verizon contract with a Starlink contract. That was his suggestion for air traffic control in America. And that would have been insane because the government would have had to pay Verizon off anyway if they cancelled their contract for no reason because it was already a done deal. And Verizon's not to blame for what's going on at air traffic control because they haven't even implemented their new system yet. There's this ancient, decades-old system that Verizon are meant to replace over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
They haven't even started yet.
Yes.
So it's not their fault. At the time, I said this was outrageously corrupt from Elon Musk and it stunk of conflicts of interest. It didn't even make sense. Why would you use a satellite system for internet that absolutely can't afford to fail?
Right.
When the weather affects it.
Yes.
That doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Apparently, behind the scenes, the administration quietly killed off Musk's move. And no one knew that. And
yeah, I'd just forgotten about it.
Yeah, well, I don't think it got reported. They got killed off. But apparently it was killed off. Just didn't get out. And Elon is pissed off about that, apparently. Now, I can believe this.
Yes.
I'm not sure how the timing works. I don't know. Maybe it was killed off this week or whatever. I'm not sure how the timing works. But this rings truer to me than the one before.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is costing Elon big money. Number 3, I've noted a few times now that Elon keeps suggesting that he's not actually going to go. He keeps saying, I'll be here every second week. I'll be here for a few days. And I always found that weird because I knew there was that time limit of 130 days for his role. But he keeps on hinting that he's not going to go. He'll take a small step back, and then he keeps on suggesting that he's not going to go. He'll just take another small step back, and then just another small step back. And the theory is that he wanted to keep going. And the White House wouldn't let him.
Right. That aligns more with my understanding of what he's doing.
Yeah, and then being a special government employee meant he had a 130-day limit, yes, but if there's one thing we know about this administration is that they're prepared to ignore the law if it suits them.
Totally.
And they go, sue us. If you don't like it, sue us. But they didn't do that this time. they were very happy to let him go because probably he annoys a lot of staff there. That's what you hear. And apparently that pissed Musk off. That also rings true to me and explains why he did go off.
Yes.
Only a few days after he finally was pushed out of the building.
Yes, yeah.
With his gold key. Then the fourth one, I've told you before that Trump nominated Musk's little buddy Jared Isaacman to be the head of NASA.
Yes, yeah.
They're great friends, and given the kind of contracts that NASA could hand out to SpaceX, create a massive conflict of interest situation. This week, Trump withdrew that nomination.
Wow.
Leaks suggested the reason why was because Isaacman had donated to Democrats. That might be true. But the theory is that this really pissed Elon Musk off. And he thought, whether it's true or not, he thought it was a deliberate swipe from one of his enemies. Because one of his enemies in the administration was the director of the Office of Presidential Personnel, Sergio Gore, who decides this shit. And Elon's tear occurred the day after that news came out.
Right.
So the timing works out perfectly.
It does.
And I think that's it. And so,
it could be a combination.
Could be a combination. But I reckon that's what tipped him over the edge.
Yeah.
So he just thought, well, fuck these guys.
Yes.
I'm getting them. And so anyway, so that is that's my. What's your thought on all that?
Yeah, I don't have much more to add on that, but just to go back to a slightly earlier point about the bond markets and growth.
Yeah.
I just want to note something that I noticed, which is the bizarre re-entry of Liz Truss into global politics.
Yes.
So Liz Truss, you may or probably may not remember, was Britain's shortest serving prime minister for 40 days, about as long as the biblical flood lasted, although significantly less successful than the biblical flood.
Caused about the same damage.
Yeah. When I was in the UK, I picked up this book, which I recommend, by Anthony Seddon, called Truss at 10. Anthony Seddon is this conservative British political commentator who he writes a book about every prime minister, once their prime ministership is over, evaluating their prime ministership against this criteria that he sets up. Now, all these books are roughly the same length. So the one about Liz Truss is written in excruciating detail.
Is this going on the book list?
Yes, yeah, because he's only covering 40 days. And he does point out in the introduction, this book required significantly less research than all of the other books. But anyway, one of the really big issues that brought her down was that she and her Chancellor of the Exchequer, basically with almost no consultation with anybody, including, crucially, the Bank of England, came up with this plan that, this might sound familiar, was going to be a massive unfunded tax cut. So, huge tax cut, mainly directed at wealthy people, no concurrent spending cut at all. There's actually an increase in NHS funding that was attached to it. As soon as this thing was announced, in Britain it's the gilt market, that's GILT, started to go crazy. Yeah. Okay, the indications were really, really bad. They were seriously thinking about, is anybody going to lend us money after this? And that, in the end, was one of the things that led to the very quick termination of Liz Truss's prime ministership. Has Liz Truss learned anything from this? Hell no! And by the way, you do not secure the kinds of positions on the international conservative speaking circuit that Liz Truss has secured by learning lessons from election defeats. Fuck no! So she, as well as having been in Australia not long ago, which is that is a general indicator in the conservative world. The more time you spend in Australia, the less relevant you're becoming in your own country. She also wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post saying, the elites thwarted my agenda. They must not be allowed to thwart Trump's. Now, This person, we have to remember, is, like, by background a libertarian. She was actually originally a member of the Liberal Democrats in the UK before she became a conservative. Now she is singing in favour of Trump's tariffs because of the fact that they needed to rebalance global trade against the unfairness of China. But she also has this really interesting sort of revisionist spin on her own prime ministership, which has been building since the prime ministership, which is that the very, very bad reaction of the gilt market, that wasn't her fault. That was the Bank of England's fault for not telling her that that was going to happen.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Now, that might have also had something to do with the fact that she wasn't really talking to the Bank of England at that time because she wasn't interested in their pointy-headed elite establishment advice.
Yeah.
Yes. But so that's who she blames it on. She also claims it was actually mainly the Bank of England's policies that led to that. I assume by that she's meaning the desperate repair job that the Bank of England had to do to the pound after the and to the gilts after the damage that she did to it. But anyway, so when you see Liz Truss making a comeback in thought circles, that suggests that the quality of the thought going on is not very high. But there are some pretty significant parallels with Trump here. One is the idea growth will cure everything. Yeah. So that was a whole position. This is going to cause growth. Growth is good. Britain has not had enough growth. And it's true, there had been like a 10-year period of not exactly stagnation, but very, very sluggish economic growth. By the way, that was a 10-year period of exclusively conservative rule. So she was saying the other conservatives have not been growth-oriented enough. And that's the same thing that Trump would say about previous Republican administrations as well. But we've already gone into, why just growth is not the answer to everything, especially when there's no guarantee that what you're doing is going to lead to any growth. Like, there aren't that many people who actually link tariffs with economic growth. Tariffs can be used for specific, long-term economic purposes. But if what you're looking for is short-term explosion of growth, that is not tariffs, because tariffs dampen consumption.
Apart from creating a golden age.
Apart from creating a golden age. Yes. So, it's when you're starting to draw comparisons to Liz Truss, you're probably not doing it right.
Probably.
Now, admittedly, Trump is there for 4 years, but still not a good comparison.
No. My final question on this topic, though, is why hasn't Trump responded? Why has he gone silent? Because that is the weirdest and possibly most threatening aspect of all. He just has gone silent in response to Elon Musk. Now, I always thought...
Is he workshopping responses?
I don't know. I always thought Trump and Musk had maybe a bit of a father-son thing going, because Trump is about his dad's age. And Elon Musk...
Doesn't like his dad.
Doesn't like his dad at all.
Yes.
So you're having a replacement father figure.
Errol Musk. Yeah.
I mean, that could explain Trump keeping his hand. And you could just see Trump thinking, this is what my son should be like, this guy, not the clowns that I've got as my actual sons. The other thing is that, obviously, like, maybe Trump thinks Elon isn't making any difference, so he can afford to shut up. Why start a fight? Well, why continue a fight that he doesn't need to?
That might be it.
Maybe it's all about money, that Trump is desperate to get Elon Musk's $100 million from the midterms. He doesn't want to piss him off. I don't know, but it's just, to me, it's really, really interesting that Elon did more to undermine Trump's authority than anyone I have seen in the Republican Party since Trump turned up, and Trump responded with zero. You got any thoughts?
No.
Okay. Well, maybe you have thoughts about this.
It's the Michigan Corner.
It's a stone cold certainty you got thoughts about this. Okay, Dave, now you're talking a story here.
Yes.
I have no idea about. When you mentioned it to me, I was like, I don't even know what these words mean. What part of speech are these words? I have no idea. So you're going to have to explain this to all of us.
Okay, we are going to talk about the pathetic saga of Santo.
Okay, is that a wind? What is that?
Santo Ono, until a few weeks ago, was the president of the University of Michigan.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so for Australians, that's like the vice chancellor of the University of Michigan. He had taken over. He is one of these figures that you get in American higher education who sort of really rapidly rose through the leadership ranks. So I think that his first president job was University of Cincinnati in 2015. From there, very quickly to the University of British Columbia. From there, very quickly to the University of Michigan. And generally, when somebody rises up through the ranks that quickly and just goes to bigger and bigger universities, it's usually because they're a very good fundraiser. Okay, so I don't really know that much about him, but I imagine that was a very important part of his skill set. And he had the good fortune to be president of the University of Michigan when the University of Michigan won the national championship in football.
Okay.
Now, having said all of that, to call Santo Ono a spineless weasel is an insult to weasels everywhere. One of the reasons why he got the University of Michigan job was because he talked about a commitment to DEI.
Oh.
And he actually said as recently as 2024 that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, was one of his major areas of focus at the University of Michigan.
I can see where this is going.
Now, his previous jobs might not have led you to expect that. At University of British Columbia, for example, he refused to cancel a speaker at a fundraising dinner who had been the chair of Canada's Olympic Committee, but had also been a missionary in the 1960s and was accused of abusing Indigenous children in remote areas of Canada. Did not cancel that.
It's certainly a different kind of person to be a speaker, though.
That's
diverse.
Yeah, really is. But anyway, at Michigan, he said he was very committed to DEI.
Okay.
Until he was not.
Yes.
And that would be the moment that Trump got elected.
Amazing coincidence.
He rolled over basically before anybody else. He rolled over before Michigan even got targeted about this. Now, University of Michigan, like many other campuses across the United States, had pro-Palestinian protests. It didn't have the bigger pro-Palestinian protests, or the more prominent ones, but it had certainly had them, and he had to deal with those. But yeah, as soon as Trump got elected, he actually dismantled a DEI program, which was really at the heart of the University of Michigan's identity. And the reason for that was University of Michigan had fought Supreme Court cases in the early 2000s for their right to use race-based affirmative action in law school admissions and in undergraduate admissions generally. They went all the way to the Supreme Court to defend that right. In 2006, though, there were state laws passed through the Michigan legislature banning that use of racial criteria at all in admissions. The result at the University of Michigan was the student black population dropped from 8% of the overall population, which is close to proportional in terms of the state of Michigan, to 4%. Okay, so really serious drop-off, which meant that the university had to devise a diversity and equity and inclusion program to achieve the outcomes that it had previously been getting through affirmative action. And so this is a much bigger thing, much bigger in scope. And University of Michigan, which is a pretty liberal campus, this was a very big part of its identity. So when Santo Ono dismantled that, there were a lot of people at the University of Michigan who were very, very pissed off, very, very upset, really felt that they'd been betrayed. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of people in favor of it as well, but he was really going against the institutional grain when he did that. Now, a few weeks ago, Santo Ono shocked the higher education world with this op-ed that was published in Inside Higher Education. This was not just an op-ed, this was announcing the new job that he had got. And the op-ed was called Why I Chose the University of Florida.
I think I know why.
Yes. It says, over the past several weeks, I've had the chance to spend meaningful time with the university's leadership. I believe deeply in their vision, ambitious, anchored in a culture of excellence and laser focused on student success. The passion I've seen for this institution, including during my visit to campus earlier this week to meet its students, faculty and administrators, and presumably its alligators as well, because it famously has gators wandering around campus, is infectious. And the alignment between the Board of Trustees, the Board of Governors, the Governor and the legislature is rare in higher education. This alignment signals seriousness of purpose, and it tells me that Florida is building something truly exceptional. I'm excited to be part of that. Now, it turns out a lot of people in Florida were not excited about him being part of that. And it's a bit naive for him to talk about the alignment between the Board of Trustees, the Board of Governors, the Governor, and the legislature, because he was ignoring the fact that none of those are the driving force of conservative politics in Florida. That would be Trump superfans who spend 19 hours a day on social media. And they did not like him one bit.
Why not?
Now, I'll just mention here as well, institutionally, even though the University of Florida Board of Governors had offered him the job, it still had to go through another board that governs the whole Florida State University system.
Right.
And they have just voted 10-6 to rescind his job offer. Yeah. Well, he knew that he had to address the DEI issue. He says, like many, I supported what I believed to be the original intent of DEI, ensuring equal opportunity and fairness for every student. That's something on which most everyone agrees. Once again, I don't think he realizes which state he's actually in now. But over time, I saw how DEI became something else, more about ideology, division, and bureaucracy, not student success. That's why, as president of the University of Michigan, I made the decision to eliminate centralized DEI offices and redirect resources towards academic support and merit-based achievement. It wasn't universally popular, but it was necessary. I stood by it, and I'll bring that same clarity of purpose to UF. Well, turned out to not to be bringing that clarity of purpose to UF, because UF told him, F you. He should have seen this coming, but he didn't. Santo, you absolute rube. Nobody in Michigan is upset about this at all.
This feels pretty personal to me, Dave.
The Washington Post asked the University of Michigan Board of Regents for a comment about this. They said Santo offered his resignation and we accepted it.
Let's get on the tariffs. Now, you got a few bits on this, but I'll start and then we'll get into some of your bits.
Okay.
Let's start with the legal situation. Where we left you last week was that the Trump administration was very, very angry about the tariffs case, making their tariffs illegal. We will come back to the anger of the Trump administration a little later, but I want to explain why Trump was so out of line with this one, because I only did the superficials in the last pod. We've discussed before that the emergencies that Trump declared for this law were rubbish emergencies. And that IEPA doesn't even mention the possibility of using it for tariffs.
Nope.
We have mentioned that before. But it goes way past that. The reason IEPA was passed in 1977 is actually important to understand, to realize just how wrong this was with Trump. IEPA was a response to a state of emergency declared during the Great Depression in 1933 because of the Depression. And that's fair enough. Fair enough they had an emergency during the Depression. But then presidents never undeclared that emergency. It kept being declared. And presidents kept on using that emergency to pass tariffs. They passed it for decades, up to the 70s, in a huge abuse of power. Me doing PEP 40 years ago, I've been going about this. These states of emergency, what's going on? It's depression emergency. And so they wrote IEPA in 1977. Sorry, 60 years ago, PEP. And so they wrote IEPA in 1977 to limit president's use of emergency powers. That's the point of IEPA.
So it was supposed to be limiting, not enabling.
Yes, limiting. To stop presidents levying tariffs willy-nilly during peacetime. That's the point of IEPA. So for Trump to turn around and then use IEPA specifically to impose completely unlimited tariffs, however he wanted to, for no good reason, that's the direct opposite of the intention of that bill. Furthermore, it gets worse. IEPA is also there to help Congress limit the president's use of tariff power. It allows Congress to pass a joint resolution to overrule any action the president takes under IEPA. But in March, when they were keeping the government open, Virginia Fox snuck language into the House bill, making it impossible for the House to pass one of those resolutions. If you recall, they played silly buggers on how long a congressional day was.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So between Trump and the House Republicans, they bastardized this law just about as much as possible. And so good on the courts for just saying, no, you just can't do that. And I fully expect the Supreme Court to back them up on this one. So that is why this IEPA stuff was just what the court said was perfectly sensible, and anyone complaining has no idea. Then we get to the second court case, because the next day there was another court case for tariffs. I'm not going to spend long on this, except to say it was a federal district court in D.C. that did this, Judge Rudolph Contreras. He also found the IEPA tariffs to be illegal, except he went even further than the first court, the Court of International Trade. They held it's possible to use IEPA for tariffs in specific cases, but none of those cases apply to Trump. That's what they said. The district court here said IEPA can never be used for tariffs at all under any circumstances.
Wow.
So they went way further. They noted that, or he noted, that not only doesn't it have the word tariffs in the law, like I said, but it has none of tariffs synonyms either. And it's never once been used in 50 years to impose tariffs. The district court also disagreed with the Court of International Trade. They'd be a pissing contest here. That the Court of International Trade said they had exclusive jurisdiction over IEPA. The judge agreed that the Court of International Trade has exclusive jurisdiction over civil action from laws that provide for tariffs. But in his view, IEPA isn't one of those laws.
Right.
And so he said any court can deal with it because it's not about tariffs. And the court noted that while IEPA has never been used for tariffs ever, it has appeared in hundreds of district court cases for other reasons.
Yes.
So obviously district courts can deal with IEPA, he said. Anyway, that question isn't important because both courts thought that the tariffs are illegal under IEPA. Anyway, by the way, there are 10 other groups of plaintiffs all challenging various tariffs right now. So there may be more cases making news soon. But we'll wait for the Supreme Court to weigh in on this, possibly for another year. So let's just reflect that if Trump wasn't stubborn, he has other options anyway. Lots. Let me go through them quickly. Section 122 of the Trade Act 974. Simplest option. This is the easy one for Trump. He can just snap his fingers, requires no investigations, requires no preconditions, instant tariffs from the president, legally solid, no one will say no, you can do it. He just can't tariff more than 15%, and it can't go for more than 150 days unless Congress gets involved. So if he's modest with his tariffs, he can do it. Section 301 of the Trade Act 974, unlimited tariffs, any tariff he likes. But first, it requires an investigation from the Commerce Department to show the country that the country you're tariffing against is restricting US commerce in unjustifiable ways. That could take months. Trump has used this section before for Chinese tariffs in his first term. So he knows how to do it. That's a bit harder, but unlimited tariffs. If he doesn't want the 15% limit, he can do that. Just bother to run an investigation. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act 962 can also do this very quickly. But he can only apply it to specific sectors of the economy, and he has to be justifiable for national security reasons. Courts give a lot of deference, though, to what national security means. He's already using Section 232 for his steel and aluminium tariffs and for his car tariffs. So he knows it exists. He can do it. These three I've just read out are all pretty straightforward and legally solid, which is why I expect Trump to take the fourth option.
Yes, yeah.
Because he never takes the straightforward and legally solid option. Section 338 of the Trade Act 1930 is otherwise known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act.
Yes.
This is the famous one from before the Depression. It allows tariffs of up to 50%, but only against countries that the president finds have placed a burden on US commerce. I'll quote from the Act. Whenever the president shall find as a fact that any foreign country places any burden or disadvantage upon the commerce of the United States, he shall, when he finds that the public interest will be served thereby, by proclamation specify and declare such new or additional rate or rates of duty as he shall determine will offset such burden or disadvantage not to exceed 50% on any products of such foreign country. Sounds like that law should have ended with the phrase, "Thank you for your attention to this matter." Anyway, that's super simple, but it's also probably obsolete.
Yes.
Because legally that act is thought to have been superseded by the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which I just told you about, the steel tariffs, and then the Trade Act of 1974, which I also just told you about, the 15% tariff one.
Yep.
That's why it hasn't been used before.
Yes.
So this is legally risky from Section 338, which sounds to me like it's got Trump written all over it.
Yep.
So we'll see about that. You never know with him, but Trump supporters shouldn't complain, bottom line, about the courts taking away his powers to impose tariffs, because they haven't.
Yes.
Those powers exist if he could be bothered to observe any limitations whatsoever.
Yes.
Also note, there are also non-tariff ways of regulating trade. The USMCA has a built-in review for July 2026.
Yes.
Trump could easily use that review to negotiate whatever changes he wants to Canada and Mexico trade.
Yes.
It's easy. Probably the simplest way to get stuff done. So he won't do that.
No.
All right. So that is his options, which
Yes.
we should always bear in mind when we get to the next bit, which is his anger at the tariffs. The fact that the courts haven't really stopped Trump from doing anything at all, other than blatantly breaking the law, hasn't stopped Trump supporters whinging an awful lot. Like, for instance, Caroline Levitt.
The courts should have no role here. There is a troubling and dangerous trend of unelected judges inserting themselves into the presidential decision-making process. America cannot function if President Trump, or any other president for that matter, has their sensitive diplomatic or trade negotiations railroaded by activist judges.
In other words, Charlie Kirk tweeted out, with activist judges, what's even the point of having a president? Another.
Yeah.
Steve Miller.
Good. Retire, Charlie. Sorry, you've been defeated by the activist judges. There's no point to you anymore.
He's saying Trump should retire. He's saying there's no point having a president. I suppose.
I have choose to interpret it as there's no point to having Charlie Kirk.
Sure. And Steve Miller tweeted out, the judicial coup is out of control. Now, let's be clear here. The judges are doing their job. The Court of International Trade was created by an act of Congress in 1980 to specifically adjudicate disputes about tariffs. They don't get much to do, these guys. They don't have much of a job. This is it. So much as it exists, this is it. But Dave, let's leave the Court of International Trade aside. There's a lot of talk over the last few weeks about injunctions and the Supreme Court and people stopping Trump doing his job. People interfering with presidential powers. Why don't these judges go and run for office if they want to control the country? We hear this so often. So Dave, is there a judicial coup? And if so, if not, why not?
There is not a judicial coup because the president has to act within the law.
That's a good answer.
Now, yes, it is true that this is constraining policy, but it's only constraining policy when that policy is illegal. Okay? So that's what it comes down to. It's making the president act within the law, and if he acts outside the law, not letting him do that.
Yeah.
This is rule of law. This is a pretty fundamental pillar of democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also something that historically the right has really, really stressed.
Yes, it is.
Really, really stressed
Yes.
because they distrusted democratically elected leaders or democratically elected legislators doing whatever they wanted to do. They trusted the courts to keep the status quo going.
What do they always say? This is not democracy. This is a republic.
This is a republic.
yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, no, it is not a judicial coup unless you consider Trump having to obey the law as a coup. Now, we did look last week at one legal theory that goes perilously close to this, which is unitary executive theory, which in Trump's telling is, I can do whatever I want. So it's time for conservatives to ask themselves, is this actually, after more than 2 centuries, is this actually their grand theory of government? That Trump can do whatever he wants? That Trump's childhood dream, probably stemming from the first time that someone told him that he had to use the toilet like a big boy, is his childhood dream that no one would ever be able to tell him what to do again. Is this your vision of government? Because that's what it looks like at the moment when you're complaining about judges making Trump follow the law.
I have to agree with you, Dave. Let me also add to that it's not just that it's just making him follow the law, but there are so many circumstances where no one is stopping him doing what he wants to do as long as he follows a proper process. And he refuses to follow the process.
Yes.
The tariffs is just one example where I just read you out alternative paths he's chosen to not take. He does this over and over again, refusing to follow the conventional path to exercise his power and instead try and blast his way through a new, legally novel way of exercising power with less restriction and more authority. He did the same with the Alien Enemies Act. He could have deported all those guys through the normal process, but no. He wanted to do it the weird, novel way. Revoking student visas.
Yep.
I don't need to behave like Trump's personal Gestapo.
No.
They easily could have revoked those visas through a normal process, but they chose not to do that. The defunding Harvard University could be done through Title VI if Trump wants to. But first you need to conduct an investigation. Then you need to attempt to negotiate a resolution. Then you need to hold a formal hearing. And then you need to give 30 days notice. It'll take a year, but you can still do it.
Yeah.
But Trump did none of those things. He's going to lose that case because he did none of those things. And then he'll complain. He'll go, the court won't let me control my funding. No, you can. Just follow the process that's in front of you that your lawyers have undoubtedly told you about. You can't complain about judges not doing their job properly when they're responding to you not doing your job properly.
That's very true.
Yeah. Okay, what about the numbers? Because Trump would say, as of June the 3rd, an incredible 186 court rulings have at least temporarily paused some of his administration's initiatives so far. That's true. In terms of unique cases, so no multiple rulings from the one case, there have been 97 cases that Trump has at least temporarily lost so far. In May, he had a 96% loss ratio. That's quite a high loss ratio. Trump would say he's had to file 41 emergency appeals to the Supreme Court so far, which is more than 5 times as many as George W. Bush and Barack Obama filed during their combined 4 terms. 5 times as much. One way to look at that is to say the courts are biased against him and they're usurping his power. The other way is what you just said, that he is unusually unlawful. Steve Vladek wrote an excellent article about this, which I could have put in my grateful, but I will share the highlights for you right now. Number 1, Trump himself shows that he respects many of the legal rulings out there. Yeah. How does he show that? Well, what do you do if you get a bum ruling, Dave? What do you do if you're in a court and they give you a terrible ruling?
You appeal.
You appeal. That's exactly what you do.
And you obviously put the judge's children's details online.
Let's leave that bit for a second.
Yes.
So what does it say? That Trump has lost 97 unique cases so far, And only in 17 of those 97 cases has Trump made an emergency application to the Supreme Court for those rulings to be overturned.
Suggests he might not have been particularly confident that he would have won on appeal.
In 80 of 97 cases. He loses every time in the law firm executive orders.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't appealed once.
No.
The Alien Enemies Act. He's got injunctions against him from District of Colorado, from Southern District of New York, from the Western District of Pennsylvania, from the Southern and Western Districts of Texas. No appeals. Why not? He didn't appeal the Court of Appeals decision for either Ozturk or Khalil, the student visa cases. Why not? Presumably there isn't a judicial coup going on in all of these cases that Trump isn't challenging. So he's kind of admitting that the decisions are fair.
Yes.
The Supreme Court rarely agrees with him on the merits. Number 2. Even in the cases where the Supreme Court has shown him some love, there have been 8 of them so far. The first 4, Trump won on procedural grounds through some technicality, which had nothing to do with any of his arguments. 3 more were entirely unexplained. It's just it's just hard to explain. Like they gave no reasons. And only in 1 of the 8 cases did Trump win because he actually won on the merits of the case. It was the one we talked about last week, the Humphreys executive. That's the one where the court said, no, we agree with Trump. That's the only one. And I didn't like that. So it's not like Trump's arguments are winning in the Supreme Court either. Also, unlike under Biden, we've seen literally 0 cases where an individual judge has been hand-selected for a case. Remember under Biden, they kept on going to Judge Kaczmarek?
Yes.
Because they thought he's a surefire judge shopping situation. Even though plenty of cases are taken to D.C., Maryland, and Massachusetts district, those 3 districts only account for 55 of 97 unique cases, or 56.7%. That leaves 43% that were brought elsewhere. Still a lot of cases, a record-breaking number of cases, by the way. And by the way, in 26 of the 97 unique cases that Trump has at least temporarily lost, it was a Republican-appointed judge, 27% of them. It was this certainty from Trump that he's facing a judicial coup that convinced him to lash out. And this is where you're going to come in, Dave, after I read out the tweet about Leonard Leo. Trump tweeted out, where do these initial 3, talking about the tariff case here, these initial 3 judges come from? How is it possible for them to have potentially done such damage to the United States of America? Is it purely a hatred of Trump? What other reason could it be? I was new to Washington and it was suggested I use the Federalist Society as a recommending source on judges. I did so openly and freely, but then realized that they were under the thumb of a real sleazebag named Leonard Leo, a bad person who in his own way probably hates America and obviously has his own separate ambitions. He openly brags how he controls judges and even justices of the United States Supreme Court. I hope that's not so, and don't believe it is. In any event, Leo left the Federalist Society to do his own thing. I'm so disappointed in the Federalist Society because of the bad advice they gave me on numerous judicial nominations. This is something that cannot be forgotten. Dave.
Okay, let's talk about the Federalist Society. There's a book that I really highly recommend for anyone interested in the conservative legal movement, which is called The Conservative Legal Movement. It's by Stephen Teles.
Is it in the book list?
I'm not sure if it's already in the book list.
Is it going there?
It probably should be, yes.
Yeah, to the book list. Look in the blurb if you want to see the book list.
Yeah, and so Stephen Teles makes the point that there was this very robust liberal legal movement from FDR onwards of people who realised that they could achieve certain liberal policy aims through the courts that they couldn't achieve through legislatures. And the conservative legal movement began in the 1970s as a response to this and has since become a lot bigger and more powerful than the liberal legal movement. So the Federalist Society is a manifestation of this. It began in 1982, so halfway through Reagan's first term. It operates on a number of levels, but one of the most important ways that it operates is it's a network that's in law schools, right? So conservative-minded law students can very quickly find their people, okay? And the Federalist Society, I mean, it organizes all kinds of events. It provides all kinds of support. Certainly students who want to do clerkships with conservative judges are usually members of the Federalist Society. It's a very, very powerful and important network. And by the way, it's completely above board. It's not some secret society. No. Its workings are very transparent, and it revels in the amount of power that it has. Okay, so Leonard is one of the founders of the Federalist Society, and until recently was, I don't know what position he exactly had in there, but it's very important. Now,
Grand Poobah.
Yes. Now, Trump's thing about, I was new to Washington, like I didn't know who to ask for judges, and so some guy recommended the Federalist Society to me. That's not quite how it happened. No. Have to remember, in 2016, a lot of conservatives were still very uncertain about Trump. They didn't regard him as a real conservative. They were, in conservative legal circles, they were terribly worried about his vulgarity. They were worried that he couldn't get elected. They were worried that he was going to discredit conservatism. Even a lot of evangelical Christian leaders were quite cool on Trump at this point, even though a lot of evangelical rank and file were already right behind him. So it was under these circumstances where Trump didn't even know whether he was going to be able to rely on conservative support to win in 2016 that he did two very important things. One, he recruited Mike Pence as his vice presidential candidate, who was seen as the sort of ambassador of the Christian right. Two, this was actually a lot more important, he agreed to let the Federalist Society choose judges. For conservatives who weren't sure about Trump, that was the reassurance that they needed, because they thought everything that's going to happen that's going to be really important is going to happen at the judicial level. Okay, what we want is someone who will appoint the judges that we want.
And critically, this was probably the most important issue of 2016 because Scalia had just died.
Absolutely.
So what that meant was it was a 4-all court.
Yes.
And whoever won this election was going to get a majority on the Supreme Court. It would have been the first time since the 60s that the left had a majority on the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And Republicans wanted to stop that at all costs.
Yes.
As long as if the Republican won, they would appoint a Republican judge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was what got Trump over the line with conservatives who were not sure about him at that point. Okay. So it was a very important political move for him to embrace the Federalist Society. Also, what was Trump going to choose these judges himself? Was he going to look through a legal directory on his own and Google people and find? No, he needed someone to tell him who to choose as judges. At that point, we also have to remember there wasn't the kind of massive MAGA infrastructure around him then that there was now, right? The Federalist Society was all he had. Now, so it was the Federalist Society that prepared lists for him to choose from. So all of his Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, somebody that Trump world is particularly appalled by at the moment. These were all Federalist Society picks. But perhaps even more consequentially, the 200 federal judges that he appointed, which, as I conceded a few months ago, that's not actually an unusually high number of federal judges, but nonetheless, it's a lot.
Yep.
It reshapes the judiciary. They were all Federalist Society picks as well. So every time we talk about a Trump-appointed judge said no to Trump on something, it's probably a Federalist Society pick. I don't know if there's anyone who wasn't on a Federalist Society list. Probably someone. There were probably some other weird recommendations that Trump got on the golf course. But most of them were Federalist Society picks.
Yes.
So what Trump is finding now is that when he's trying to do things that are rampantly illegal, all of these Trump-appointed judges are saying no to him, right? They're, as much as they talk about radical left judges, it gets to a point where nobody can ignore how many Trump-appointed judges are saying no. This is what's led to the attack on the Federalist Society. Now, this had been a long time. There had been previous rifts between Trump and Leonard Leo before.
He was very annoyed in 2020 that the Federalist Society didn't back his theories of the election.
He was extremely annoyed, that the Federalist Society didn't back his theories of the election. And that, by the way, was what drove him on his 4-year quest of trying to find lawyers who were total subscribers to fringe legal theories. And this accounts for the legal stuff that he's got now and the insane bullshit that they're coming out with.
Yes.
We went into some fine examples of that, earlier on. In Project 2025, as part of their massive search for personnel, they're explicitly looking for lawyers who didn't mind the damage to their career advancement that would happen by backing fringe Trump legal theories. Okay, so, he's on the outs with the whole conservative legal profession at the moment. So this is where the attacks on the Federalist Society come from. Now, it has to be said, overall, the Federalist Society judges are far more favourable to Trump than other judges would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they're still giving him a lot. A huge amount, but they're not giving him everything.
They're not flunkies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for him, anything short of everything is betrayal, and it's unconstitutionally getting in the way of Mr. Trump and everything that he wants to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if we look at it from the other side,
yes,
from looking at it from the Federalist point of view for a second, because we've just been looking at it from Trump's point of view up to now.
Yes.
This is a scary moment for them because the thing of a Republicans' point of view, they flocked to Trump because he promised to nominate conservative judges.
Yes.
They turned a blind eye to all the sexual assault, the corruption, the racism, everything in return for judges.
Yep.
And now Trump's saying he's turning his back on the Federalist Society. Well, almost all conservative judges are in the Federalist Society.
Yes.
He's not going to appoint some super leftist judge.
No.
So who's he going to appoint? He's going to appoint flunkies and loyalists who are going to undermine their conservative legal theories.
Yes.
There's a phrase that has been thrown around for the last 4 decades in America. No more suitors.
Yes.
Souter he just died just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
He was famously, as George H.W. Bush pick, I believe, is supposed to be super conservative when they picked him, and then he just turned out to just not agree with anything the conservatives said, and he ended up being effectively a liberal judge. And they hated that so much.
Yes.
And that was kind of what the Federalist Society was all about, making sure that when you pick someone, you knew what they believed. Because they remember the Federalist Society, you know what they believe. If Trump's picking randos, some of them might be conservative as well. Some of them could be suitors. Some of them could be worse than suitors. Some of them could be super left-wing. I mean, think of Trump. Think of Trump's theories. A lot of them are very left-wing. So it's possible that
I would not call them left-wing.
What? Tariffs, populism, like the...
Do you know that Students for a Democratic Society, the radical left student group, genuinely radical left student group that met in Port Huron in 1964 to rail against American imperialism, one of the things they were railing against was tariffs that were levied on poor countries.
Sure.
The party that pushed tariffs for 80 years before World War II was the Republican Party.
Bernie Sanders still isn't criticizing the tariffs, even now.
Industrial protectionism... It can be left-wing. Yeah. It can also be right-wing as well.
Sure.
Opposition to industrial protectionism can be right-wing, but it can also be left-wing
Absolutely.
as well.
I'm not saying Trump is left-wing.
Yes.
I said so many of his policies can be left-wing. They can be. It's just like there are examples all over the world of left-wingers with very similar policies in certain examples. Of Trump. And what I'm saying is a judge who supports him and only him could actually end up being quite a left-wing judge. Like to the horror of the Federalist Society. They don't know. There could be way worse for them than Amy Coney Barrett. Like way worse. And so they're freaking out about this. They might have enabled this dude and then not got the judges either. Because Biden's just appointed his bunch. And if Trump just appoints a whole bunch of flunkies that aren't Federalist Society types, the Federalist Society judges become a minority really fast. So they're really worried about this. And there's a case right now in front of their eyes, which is their nightmare coming to fruition, which is who is the person that Trump just nominated to a circuit court just now? Emil Bowe.
Yes.
Who is a flunky.
Yes.
No one knows what his philosophy is. No one has any idea. He could easily be a suitor. You don't have any idea at all. All you know is that he's Trump's enforcer. That's all you know. Whatever Trump wants, Trump gets. That's fine for the next 3 years.
Yes.
Then after that, what's Bowe going to do for the next 40?
Yes.
No one knows. This freaks out the Federalist Society.
Yes.
Right? Especially given, since Trump knows and no one's going to be more loyal to him than Emil Bowe,
Yeah.
guess who the Supreme Court pick's going to be when the vacancy comes? It's going to be him.
Yes. Yeah.
They don't want this dude on the Supreme Court.
No.
This guy could be the ultimate loose cannon. They could lose their majority because of this guy.
Speaking of which, I've been thinking about. So I was expecting Samuel Alito to announce his retirement from the Supreme Court almost as soon as Trump took office.
Yep.
And it's still possible that after. I mean, he wouldn't have done that because they still had a lot of things to decide. But it is possible after the decisions that come through in June, we might get a retirement announcement from Alito. But he doesn't seem to be indicating that.
He's picked clerks for next year already.
Right.
And so has Thomas.
Yeah. Now,
in fact, Thomas has picked clerks for the next 3 years.
Thomas, I never expect him. Never expect him to retire. But Alito, especially after the upside down flag controversy.
I know.
His wife was talking about how much she wanted Trump to win so that Sammy could retire.
I know.
So that she could pursue her true passion of yelling at neighbours.
This was my point. I was so proud of that point. Maybe
Yes.
I'm wrong.
Is Alito a bit freaked out by the whole situation with the Federalist Society?
We don't know, because this is a point that the Federalist Society themselves have made. Ed Whelan, who's spoken at like 200 different Federalist Society functions, he's
Yes.
Mr. Federalist Society.
Yes.
He is so angry about Ed Whelan. About no.
He probably is angry about
He probably
Ed
is.
Whelan.
It's probably driving him.
Yeah.
He's so angry about Emil Bowe.
Yeah.
He refers to him as a henchman. He's not happy.
Strong language.
He's tweeting a lot at the moment about this, and he said picking Bowe would send the opposite message. It might well deter some sitting judges from stepping down from active service to create more vacancies that Trump could fill. And he cited a very conservative appellate judge who told him that he would not retire because of concerns of whom Mr. Trump would pick as a successor.
Wow.
And we might already be seeing it playing out. Listen to these numbers. At this stage of their presidency, Biden was facing 57 vacancies to fill, judicial vacancies.
Yep.
Trump, one, had 26 to fill at this point in time. Obama had 29 to fill. Bush, 2, had 30 to fill. Trump, 2, now, has 11 to fill. So it's possible they're already refusing to resign, even before this. Now, we should note, this is not all or nothing. The Trump's first 5 nominees before Emil Bowe were all Federalist Society members.
Yeah.
So it might be a bit of this, a bit of that, but this is really treacherous ground for the conservative judicial movement at the moment, and Trump. It's just there's a bit of mutually assured destruction happening here.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how this goes.
J.D. Vance said anything about this? I'm sure he was a member of the Federalist Society.
Yeah, no, he hasn't. I know of. Anything else on that topic?
Given that this started out as a discussion of tariffs.
Yeah, well, I'm going back to tariffs.
Okay, yes, yeah. Let's go back to tariffs.
Okay, all right. Okay,
Yeah.
so the next thing is 90 deals in 90 days.
90 deals in 90 days.
July 9 is coming. That's the key date. That's about a
Yes.
month away now.
Yep.
This was Kevin Hassett a week ago.
So you said that we're going to see probably more deals, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said the same thing. In the coming weeks, do you still believe that?
Yes, I do. Yes,
Okay.
I do.
All right.
And I saw last week, at the end of the week, 3 that were basically ready for the president's decision. And I don't know if people have had that conversation with him yet, but yes, there are many, many deals coming, and there were 3 that are basically look like they're done.
Wow.
Now we hear something like that every single week, Dave.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't think she's impressed. Every single week we hear about, there's deals coming. We still only have half a deal, the UK deal. That's it. None of them ever get announced, which
No.
means either Hegseth is lying every single week because there's always him,
Yes.
or the deals aren't very good.
Mm.
And so Trump just won't rubber stamp them.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Reuters says the Trump administration has been sending out letters to multiple countries asking them to provide their best offer for
Yes.
a tariff deal.
It was like by yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty
Yes.
much.
Yeah, June 4th.
And so far, we're still hearing no deals.
Of course not.
So what happens over the next month is anyone's guess.
Yes.
Because a huge factor is one that you mentioned last week, which we should go into more detail now, the taco effect.
Yes.
This is going to be a huge deal. Let's look at the clip of when Trump first introduced the concept of taco, or Trump always chickens out, something that people have been laughing about on financial Twitter for some time.
Saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number? And we have an end date of July 9th. You call that chickening out? Because we had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. But don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question. Go ahead. To me, that's the nastiest question.
I don't know if Lockie played that entire clip that we just listened to. He might have cut it down because 3 hours. But there's 2 minutes and 20 of Trump just spinning out.
Yes.
Saying nothing that makes sense. Just being furious. That he
Yes.
could not have been more angry.
Yes.
At this taco thing, and we found out one of the reasons why was not only because he's stung hard by being seen as weak and predictable,
Yes.
but also because he'd never heard of it before.
Oh, right.
And he was furious at his staff for not telling him that this was out there and him being ambushed with this in the middle of a press conference.
This is a problem that all authoritarian leaders have. When they create this atmosphere of enforced loyalty, they never find out how unpopular they are until it's too late. I imagine that the atmosphere in his office is not really conducive to anyone telling him, sir, they're calling you a chicken on the financial markets.
Yes. So my question to you, Dave, about this taco stuff is,
Yes.
like to Trump's point, which Lockie may or may not have played.
Yeah.
Isn't taco just negotiating? Like, isn't he making a fair point when he says, seeing an absurd position and then moving it back down in response to offers is my way of negotiating?
Yes. I mean, you could say he just has an opening position that he begins with in order to drag other people further to his position. That's a way of getting a better deal. Yeah, that's an established negotiating tactic. But looking at what Trump actually does, so he starts with a position that is going to damage his own country more than it's going to damage anybody else, right? So he's pointing a gun at himself at the beginning of the negotiations. That doesn't prompt other countries to go halfway or more than halfway. It prompts them to find whatever symbolic victory they can give Trump straight away, which he immediately takes and then goes almost all the way back. Now, the problem with just constantly using this strategy of start absolutely maximalist, then go nearly all the way back when you get a fairly small concession is that people pretty quickly learn what you are doing. They learn the actual value of the first offer that you're making in the first place, which is this is not to be taken seriously. This is an invitation to do something which will then give Trump to the opportunity to tell the American media, oh, they wanted to talk to me. They called me up and said, sir, they want to talk to me. And then, have some usually completely meaningless symbolic concession that he can tout as a victory. Right. So, yes, it is a form of negotiating strategy, but it's not one that is getting him very far
Let me ask you a follow-up on that,
Yes.
which you may have answered enough, but maybe you want to add more when I say this, which isn't taco, at least in polling terms,
yes,
Trump's superpower? because as soon as he's heading down a dead end, he reverses.
Right.
And if we look at the polling at the moment on trade, this is from G. Elliott Morris.
Yep.
Look at the teal line, how in the depths of the tariff war there, Trump was down by 21 points on polling and trade.
Yes.
And in the month since then, he's now down by 12 points. So he's gained 9 points of net approval on trade.
Yeah.
Just from tacoing, essentially. And I should also add that the guy who came up with taco,
Yes.
FT columnist Robert Armstrong,
Yeah.
certainly thinks that this is a positive. He said, the outcome I really, really hope does not happen is that this has anything to do with the president stopping his habitual chickening out. Let us state clearly, chickening out is good and something to be celebrated. Bad policy chickening out, hooray!
Yes.
So what's your response
Well,
to
look,
that?
one way of looking at it is, he gains 9 points by tacoing. Another way of looking at it would be if he didn't make the moronic opening position in the first place,
he might not
then
be minus
he
21.
wouldn't have lost 20 points.
Yes, that's another way to look at it.
Like, the thing is, it always costs something
Yeah.
when you start with a ridiculous opening position. It's not completely costless. It always costs something. And because he did so many of these things in his first 100 days in office, what are we at now? 120 days in?
Something like that. Yeah.
People just learnt his type as a negotiator really quickly. I mean, when I say they learned it really quickly, they could have remembered it from the first term as well, but he's been doing it even more in the second term. That means it's just going to get harder and harder for him to negotiate now because everybody knows what he does. Everybody knows that the more maximalist a threat there is, the more meaningless it is. Everybody knows that the snapback is coming. It's just a matter of finding the right lubricant to get it there. And it's usually a pretty small amount of lubricant. Now, this is a waste of everybody's time. This is a waste of the credibility of the United States. Yes, it's better that he tacos than actually follows through with threats that would, first of all, crash the United States economy and then possibly damage other countries as well. But yeah, it'd be better if he just didn't do it at all.
Yeah. There's another problem here as well, which you haven't mentioned, which is as soon as it becomes a thing, and it becomes such a thing, there's a name, and there's such a thing that there's a name that Trump knows, that creates a massive incentive for him to try and create unpredictability by not tacoing.
Yes.
And this is something that Politico was writing about the other day, that one Trump ally outside the White House is quoted as saying in this article, I don't think Trump can back down now, mainly because of this taco theme. He's clearly super irritated by it, and it's like a challenge to his very manhood now.
Yes.
And I think that's true.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about an example of that in a second with China, because that is an obvious example.
Yep.
But before I get to China, I want to ask you about the Democrats' reaction to taco, because they're loving this. They're loving this so much.
Yes. Yeah.
They're certainly not worried about overdoing it. Chuck Schumer might as well change his name to Old El Paso. He's talking about tacos so much these days. This week, at one point, the Democrats were the DNC was literally serving free tacos outside the RNC headquarters because they were so into the word taco. And this might be one where you agree with J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance tweeted in response to that, like people were seeing the clip of this. He said he tweeted out, "We have the lamest opposition in American history."
I actually agree.
I thought you might. Anyway, so I don't know if you have any thoughts about the Democrats' reaction to taco or not before we talk about China. Do you? Or
no,
leave it with
let's
JD
not
Vance.
waste our breath.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now China, we got the first genuine test of the post-taco era now, right in front of our eyes, because we got ourselves.
Can you believe we're uttering the sentence, the first genuine test of the post-taco era?
I just did. Yes. We got ourselves a legitimate standoff here. You might recall America had those 145% tariffs on China. China had 125% tariffs on America. They both agreed to knock 110% off. It seemed like it was done. And then Trump tweeted out, 2 weeks ago, China was in grave economic danger. The very high tariffs I set made it virtually impossible for China to trade into the United States marketplace, which is by far number one in the world. We went, in effect, cold turkey with China, and it was devastating for them. Many factories closed, and there was, to put it mildly, civil unrest. I saw what was happening and didn't like it. For them, not for us. I made a fast deal with China in order to save them from what I thought was going to be a very bad situation, and I didn't want to see that happen. Because of this deal, everything quickly stabilized and China got back to business as usual. Everybody was happy. That is the good news. The bad news is that China, perhaps not surprisingly to some, has totally violated its agreement with us. So much for being Mr. Nice Guy. Now, I don't know about you, I saw that and I assumed it was 100% full of shit.
Yes.
Turned out it wasn't.
Really?
Yes. Because Scott Bessent, the next day, said talks with China had stalled. Then Jamison Greer came out straight after that and explained what that tweet was referring to. We haven't seen the flow of some of those critical minerals as they were supposed to be doing. China continues to slow down and choke off things like critical minerals and rare earth magnets. Now, that was part of the deal. China would would drop its blockade of rare earth metals and magnets.
Yeah.
And that is, if what Jamison Greer was saying there is true, that is huge, because in reality, the rare earths are the whole reason Trump tacoed on Chinese tariffs. America's tech sector and auto sector were about to reach a shortage. They desperately needed those rare earths. They had a stockpile. The stockpile's gone. It's about to become critical. So if China is playing games with the rare earths, things could get quite tense. Now, it turns out China saw this as a retaliation against America. Because on May 12th, the US Commerce Department issued a warning against the use of Huawei's technology's Ascend artificial intelligence chips anywhere in the world. China saw that warning as an aggression, and they complained about it. The Trump administration ignored them, said it was just a continuation of Biden policy. They also took offense at the student visa revocation.
That's what I thought the reason was.
Yeah, well, they also mentioned that.
Yes.
They said this is focusing on Chinese students, and they had a problem with that. And so they said China was very open. The rare earth slow walk was in response to both of them.
Yes.
Then America just didn't accept that. So they retaliated to China's apparent retaliation. And America suspended some sales to China of critical US technologies, including those related to Chinese jet engines and semiconductors. And then Beijing, Beijing takes great pride in their C919 jet aircraft. So then China responded. A Chinese commerce spokesperson said, the United States had unilaterally provoked new economic and trade tensions. Instead of reflecting on itself, it's made bogus accusations and unreasonably denounced China for violating the agreement. If the US insists on its own way and continues to damage Chinese interests, China will continue to take resolute and forceful measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. Now, if China hang tough on rare earths, that could soon cripple American company supply chains.
Absolutely.
China controls 90% of the world's supply of some rare earth metals. And let me tell you how much before I let you in here, Dave. The Wall Street Journal reported this week, wait for this, that 4 major automakers in America fear the rare earth magnet blockade could force them to shut down their car production within weeks. And so, several automakers and their suppliers are considering shifting their auto parts manufacturing to China to avoid factory shutdowns. The direct opposite of what Trump wants. US facilities moving to China because tariffs are better than no supplies. We're just talking about US engine motor production here moving to China so they can get their hands on those rare earth magnets. But that would be such a perverse outcome, and I don't think Trump would like that very much. And this is when Trump tweeted out, I like President Xi of China, always have and always will, but he's a very tough and extremely hard to make a deal with. Normally this would be taco time, Dave, but this time, is it going to be taco time? I don't know. China's not going to back down.
No.
So what's Trump going to do?
That's a very good question. let's go to the kind of poker metaphors that everyone loves.
Yes.
At the moment, I think China's holding a pair of aces. And I think that Trump is holding an incomplete set of McDonald's Monopoly cards. In that tweet, it's very telling that he didn't mention critical minerals or rare earths at all. Because as he said, that was the reason why he tacoed in the first place.
Yeah.
The fact that things were getting pretty desperate, that is serious leverage that China has. Instead, he makes this bizarre claim that he only made these magnanimous concessions to China because he was worried about preventing civil unrest in China. I do not remember seeing any reports of civil unrest in China. I mean, maybe there were, but usually the Western media is pretty eager to report on any kind of civil unrest in China. I did not see anything. So I think that part of the tweet was probably bullshit. China knows how much leverage it's got with this. It was very pissed off about the student thing. It saw that as a direct insult. It was it was, and about that economic aspect as well. I think Trump is going to back down eventually, but he's just going to have to do it in a way, wait long enough that people forget about it, or do it in a way that makes it look like it's not backing down, rely on China to come up with some ridiculous face-saving measure for him. But he does not have the leverage here.
He does not hold the cards.
He does not hold the cards.
Yeah. Dave, steel tariffs you want to talk about?
So Trump's now raised the aluminium and steel tariffs from 25% to 50%. And he's been refreshingly candid about what he intends to achieve with this. Nobody's going to get round that, he said, of the 50% rate. That means nobody's going to be able to steal your industry. It's at 25%, they can get over that fence. At 50%, they can no longer get over the fence.
Indeed.
He does not want any more steel and aluminium products in the United States from other countries. He wants everything to do with steel and aluminium to be made in the US. But you know who got a carve out? Britain.
There you go.
For Britain, the steel and aluminium tariff stays at 25%.
Oh, that half a deal was worth it.
Yes. And I think we've emphasised before that's actually not one of Britain's bigger exports to the United States, but that is a carve out. Now, I think he's right to recognise that when a tariff goes up to 50%, you're basically looking at an embargo rather than a tariff. This, as we've already mentioned earlier on in the episode, is one of the reasons why he's doing this. I think it's not just because he's got a particular fixation on steel and aluminium. I think that's a very genuine kind of attachment that he has to those things. He sees them as very important to the economic vision that he's trying to create. But it's because he can do that legally. That is actually something that he has the power to do under existing law that, as far as I'm aware, hasn't been challenged yet.
He can.
If it does get challenged, it's actually going to hold up. So part of it is he is doing it because he can. But as we have pointed out before, the US just doesn't make some of the steel that it really needs.
That's true.
It doesn't make steel that is critical to its own defense industries.
The fact he's waved through the Nippon steel buyout will help them, because Nippon will make US steel more conducive to the stuff they don't do.
Yes. Oh, so this is the other thing that's happened in the last week. He's waved through the Nippon steel buyout of US steel.
Which was a good decision. I was advocating for that last year.
Yes, and that was something that the Biden administration had refused to do on economic nationalist grounds.
Oh, on winning Pennsylvania grounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of people in Pennsylvania are pretty pissed off about this, but it is very important for Trump.
And they shouldn't be pissed off because they're about to get $14 billion worth of investment. Pennsylvania will be better off. Like Nippon have agreed to keep US steel located in Pennsylvania and to put $14 billion into it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
What does John Fetterman say about this?
He was against it last year. I don't know about now.
Who knows?
Yeah, I think he's just been absent.
Yeah.
he's usually somewhere else.
Like, in a very, very poor Democratic Party class, he is so far below the bottom. Like, he's in this little table all the way out the back door by himself.
I'm not going to hear a criticism of anyone who wears hoodies and shorts. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to abide by it, Dave. My hero. But anyway.
Yes.
I got nothing else to say about tariffs.
I've got nothing else to say about
just
tariffs
about
either.
time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I tell you what. Let's just draw a line here. Lockie can crunch. And then tomorrow, I'm probably going to have about 6 minutes left. 5 or 6 minutes left to just speak as fast as I can and cram as much as I possibly can to make 259.59 again. Because, dude, we got so much we didn't get to here. The NEPA case, I really want to talk about the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
The Iran negotiations. I got so much immigration stuff. Honestly, this last 6 minutes is going to be loaded. I'll see you guys after the white flash. Dave.
Stay peppy.
Stay peppy. Welcome to the other side of the white flash, and what a difference 24 hours makes. Rarely has a podcast been put out that is more out of date before it was even released. Thank you very much, Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Although I must say, I am quite pleased that I said in the first part of this podcast that Trump's silence in response to Musk was ominous. Indeed it was. So look, I think we're going to have an extras pod early next week, probably on Monday or Tuesday, depending on when I can get a guest pepcaster to cover all the stuff that's just happened in the last 24 hours, let alone what's going to happen over the weekend. This is obviously quite a big story. So we will be coming back to cover that early next week. For now, I am going to squeeze in one more short story, a Supreme Court story about the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. This is a bit of history, first of all. During the 1950s and 1960s, there was a lot of construction going on, as you know. Lots of agencies, particularly US Army and Atomic Energy Commission, doing lots of construction. They didn't care so much about the environment. I mean, the Atomic Energy Commission, most of what they built involved radium and cancer. So the National Environmental Policy Act was passed in 1970 to deal with this. It wasn't meant to be onerous. It was just meant to require government agencies to think about the environment when they build stuff, just to consider these concerns. And the way an agency proved that they had considered the environment was with a detailed environmental impact statement, or EIS. That EIS had just listed the consequences of what they were proposing to do. That's all that was required. The courts didn't have to go crazy. Just have an EIS, that's it. But over time, environmental groups and interest groups generally realise that the easiest way to kill off a project that you don't really rate is to claim in court that the federal agency that approved that project didn't provide an adequate EIS. So in response, the statements, the EISs just got longer and longer. They became defensive objects. So they became more and more thorough, trying to dot every I and cross every T so there's no lawsuits. They started at only being a few dozen pages long, but by 2020, they're averaging 661 pages long and taking 4.5 years to put together. They're a real problem. Construction is not happening because of these EISs. Many of them were thousands of pages long and very costly as well. They'd gone from being useful documents at the beginning for public consumption to completely unreadable dreck. They were there purely to stop lawsuits, and that's it. One recent study examined 400 projects. We're talking highways, railroads, airports, pipelines, transmission lines, solar and wind energy. You got the idea. They found 28% of major projects faced litigation, with 89% of those lawsuits citing NEPA violations. Okay, it's a problem. Perversely, the most environmental projects, ones involving, say, solar panel building, they're the ones who got sued the most. 64% of the time, solar projects got sued. So in this case here, 7 County Infrastructure Coalition versus Eagle County. We're talking about a railroad here, 140-kilometre railroad, proposed for northern Utah, just trying to connect the oil produced in the northern of Utah to the broader rail network so it could be sent to the Gulf Coast oil refineries. They followed the normal process. The Surface Transportation Board produced an EIS, a very thorough EIS, I might add. It indicated 91 different mitigation measures that should be taken to look after the environment. 91, that's a lot. They looked at water quality, they looked at endangered species, they looked at the lot. Take a guess how long it was. 3,600 pages long. That's how long it was. Very long. Quite thorough. And yet, that wasn't long enough, apparently. The project was approved in December 2021, but they took it to court because the EIS wasn't good enough, the 3,600-page EIS. 4 years later, we're in the Supreme Court. The DC Court of Appeals, the last court, said that the EIS hadn't done enough, not because of what was happening on the railroad. They were very, very thorough about the direct environmental impacts of the railroad. No, the DC Court of Appeal said, no, you should have talked about the impact on the environment of the consequences of the railroad, meaning that the train will go from one place to the other and it will end up with more oil being produced. More oil, they're sending the oil to the refinery. What about the greenhouse gas effects? So it wasn't about the railroad, it was about the consequences of the railroad. The court vacated the project until the EIS had taken care of those concerns. But then the Supreme Court came in and said, no, we're not doing that. It was actually unanimous, 8-0, because Gorsuch wasn't part of this one. But there were two judgments that both agreed that we're not doing this. There was a majority judgment of 5 votes, which was the Conservatives, and Kavanaugh wrote that one. And then the Liberals had a concurrence of 3 votes, was written by Sotomayor. To sum it up, to the case, the actual point of the case, Kavanaugh said, environmental reviews should be limited to the effect of the project at hand, not to deal with every conceivable consequence. Simple. That's the whole case, because this was about every conceivable consequence, not the actual project. So that's why Kavanaugh said no. And the minority agreed with him. Having said that, he was just getting warmed up because he was sick to death of these EISs. So Kavanaugh said that NEPA has grown into a monster. He said, NEPA is a procedural cross-check, not a substantive roadblock. The goal of the law is to inform agency decision-making, not to paralyse it. So how did he see NEPA then? He said, under NEPA, an agency's only obligation is to prepare an adequate report. NEPA requires no more. Okay, so then how do you define an adequate report? That's the key here for the lawsuits. He said a report should identify potential environmental harms that could arise out of developmental projects that they approve. But once those harms are identified, the agency is free to decide that the benefits of the project outweigh those harms. And what's the role of the court in this? He said the only role for a court is to confirm that the agency has addressed environmental consequences and feasible alternatives as to the relevant project. His big takeaway at the end of the day was, when determining whether an agency's EIS complied with NEPA, a court should afford substantial deference to the agency. The agency is better equipped to assess what facts are relevant to the agency's own decision than a court is. That is certainly true. Basically, he was saying, don't get hung up on EISs. Focus on the reasonableness of the decision itself. Kavanaugh said, we're all too hung up on EISs. Quote, the ultimate question is not whether an EIS in and of itself is inadequate, but whether the agency's final decision was reasonable and reasonably explained. Review of an EIS is only one component of that analysis. Even if an EIS falls short in some respects, that deficiency may not necessarily require a court to vacate the agency's ultimate approval of a project, at least absent reason to believe that the agency might disapprove the project if it added more to the EIS. Okay, and then Sotomayor had an even simpler take. She said agencies should only be concerned with what their expertise is and authority is. The Surface Transportation Board, in this case, they're in charge of railroads. They're not in charge of oil refinery. So when they do their EIS, it should be about railroads. They have no authority to consider oil refineries, is what Sotomayor said. So she said their EIS was more than adequate. She didn't go into all the details about EISs generally, but the majority made their statement about EISs, they shouldn't be such a big deal. What does this mean? It places much stricter limits on NEPA lawsuits from now on, and EIS concerns. Should make it much easier for developers to build large-scale projects. And I don't know what you're thinking. You're going, uh-oh, that's going to hurt the environment. Not necessarily. In my view, this is actually a good decision, which returns the use of NEPA to how it was intended and written by the original law. It involves plenty of environmental consideration too. Agencies still have to write an environmental impact statement. They still have to consider the consequences of their actions. They still have to make reasonable decisions given those consequences. They still have to follow a whole bunch of environmental laws like the Clean Air Act, like the Clean Water Act, like the Superfund Law and more. You just can't lock agencies up for years in a costly and draining legal case after they've already made a reasonable decision. That's all. And by the way, Biden did this as well. There was a 2023 bill signed by Biden which limits an EISs to 150 pages and requires them to be completed in 2 years or less. So this court is just doing the same thing that Biden did, but just going a little bit further. There is one caveat, though, I should say, and that is this might all just be a pretext by the Conservatives because they hate greenies. Maybe. Because while the court right now is all about deference to agencies, I distinctly remember talking to you guys last year about Ohio versus EPA, and that was a case where the EPA was trying to write a rule to stop states that were upwind of other states from polluting the downwind states. And the Supreme Court majority invalidated that rule. Why? Because the EPA didn't adequately respond to one single annoying comment. Do you call that deference to an agency? I'm not sure I do. So is it possible that all this deference stuff is just the court lashing out at environmentalists? Yeah, possibly. There literally is only one of the deference crowd in this case who was also on the side of deference in Ohio versus EPA. And that person, you probably guessed it, was Amy Coney Barrett, the one consistent member of Team Conservative. But look, even if this was all bullshit and pretext and just greenie bashing, I actually think the result was still a good result from the judgment. From both a legal theory point of view and also from a practical effect point of view, I thought it was a good result. We should distinguish those two with Supreme Court cases. Oh my God, I'm out of time. So I will see you guys again early next week for PEP 215 Extra. Until then, stay peppy.